The human body does not fail suddenly, it does not collapse all at once. Instead, it becomes quieter. Each year, it produces slightly less energy than the year before, even when nothing appears broken. Muscles remain, organs still work, memories continue, yet the fuel that once sustained them slowly thins. In evolutionary terms, this is not an accident. The human body was shaped to survive long enough to reproduce, not to maintain full energy across many decades. What we experience as aging is not damage, but a gradual mismatch between an old design and a longer life. If nothing is truly broken, then why does the body still feel increasingly tired as time passes? Before age becomes visible, before weakness is given a name, before tiredness is recognized as a condition, the human body exists primarily as an event of energy. In the deepest layers of human history, life was not experienced as a long timeline, but as a sequence of moments that required usable strength. Energy meant warmth during cold nights, clarity during danger, movement across uneven ground, and enough endurance to reach the next source of food or shelter. In such conditions, the body did not need to preserve itself indefinitely. It needed to function well only while energy could still be produced at a level sufficient for survival. The idea of sustaining vitality across many decades would have had no meaning in a world where few lives extended that far. From an evolutionary perspective, energy comes before age. Natural selection does not optimize for longevity itself, but for performance during critical periods. Growth, reproduction, immune defense, and movement all compete for a limited energetic supply. The body learned to prioritize these demands when they mattered most. Once those demands were met, there was no strong evolutionary pressure to maintain the same energetic output indefinitely. The human body, therefore, emerged not as a structure built for endurance over time, but as a system calibrated for urgency. Energy was abundant when required and expendable afterward. What modern humans experience as decline is not a malfunction, but the gradual fading of a system that was never shaped to remain intense forever. In early human environments, energy governed every aspect of daily life. Food sources were unpredictable, climates shifted across seasons and generations, and physical effort was unavoidable. Walking long distances, carrying weight, climbing, digging, and constant alertness were normal conditions. Bodies adapted to cycles of exertion and recovery, rather than to sustained output across many years. Muscles, organs, and neural systems evolved to respond quickly to immediate challenges, not to preserve excess capacity for a distant future. There was little advantage in maintaining peak energy long after reproductive and survival roles had been fulfilled. Energy was valuable precisely because it was temporary. It was meant to be spent in moments of need, not conserved indefinitely. Archaeological evidence reinforces this pattern. Skeletal remains from early human populations often show signs of heavy physical use, but not of prolonged decline. Lives ended before slow, energetic thinning could dominate experience. Wear accumulated, but exhaustion over decades was rarely expressed simply because time itself was limited. The body did not need a mechanism to protect energy across long spans of age. It needed to respond effectively while energy was still available. In this context, aging as a prolonged state was not yet a meaningful biological problem. Only when human lifespans began to extend did this original design encounter a new condition. Improvements in safety, social cooperation, and eventually food stability allowed people to live far beyond the periods for which their energetic systems had been shaped. The same biological framework continued to operate, but now across a longer stretch of time. Energy production gradually declined not because the body failed, but because nothing in its evolutionary history had required it to remain high for so long. The design remained largely unchanged while time itself expanded. This is the quiet tension at the center of modern aging. The human body loses energy with age not due to sudden damage, but because it is living beyond the energetic expectations embedded in its structure. Energy was always meant to come first, and time second. When time stretches further than energy was designed to support, the result is not collapse, but a gradual softening. To understand why the body grows quieter with age, it is necessary to begin here, before age itself appears, at the moment when energy was all that truly mattered. When energy is treated as the foundation of life, the human body begins to look less like a structure that weakens with age, and more like a system that reallocates its resources over time. In early human conditions, energy was never stable. It rose and fell with seasons, migration routes, illness, and injury. The body learned to function within fluctuation rather than continuity. What mattered was not maintaining a constant level of strength, but responding effectively when circumstances demanded it. This shaped a biological logic in which energy could be redirected, reduced, or withdrawn without threatening immediate survival. Within this logic, the body behaves less like a reservoir and more like a flow. Energy enters through food, is transformed through metabolism, and is distributed across competing needs. Movement, repair, temperature regulation, perception, and thought all draw from the same limited source. When resources are abundant, these systems coexist with little conflict. When resources are constrained, priorities emerge. Evolution shaped those priorities towards short-term survival and reproduction. Long-term maintenance, by contrast, remained secondary. There was no persistent pressure to guarantee equal energetic investment across an entire lifespan. As time passes, this prioritization becomes visible. Energy allocation subtly shifts away from growth and rapid repair toward basic maintenance. This shift does not require damage or disease to occur. It can happen quietly, year by year, as the body continues to operate according to the same rules it always has. The loss of energy with age is therefore not a sudden event, but a gradual rebalancing. Systems that once received generous energetic support begin to function with smaller margins. Muscles recover more slowly. Attention wanders sooner. Endurance shortens. None of this signals failure. It reflects an underlying design that never promised permanence. Looking again at early human environments helps clarify this pattern. Daily life required intense bursts of effort followed by periods of rest. Hunting, gathering, and travel demanded energy in concentrated moments, not evenly across time. The body adapted to mobilize energy quickly and then conserve it when possible. Over long periods, conservation became increasingly important. Reducing output allowed survival to extend further when conditions worsened. Slowing down was not a weakness, but a protective strategy. Energy loss in this sense functioned as a form of regulation rather than decay. Archaeological and anthropological records support this view. Older individuals in early societies often occupied roles that demanded less physical exertion and more experience-based contribution. Energy was no longer invested primarily in movement or force, but in memory, social knowledge, and coordination within the group. The body's energetic shift aligned with these changing roles. Rather than maintaining youthful output, it adjusted to a different function within the community. This adjustment occurred without the need for biological redesign. The same system simply expressed itself differently over time. When modern humans live far beyond these historical conditions, the energetic pattern remains. The body continues to conserve, redistribute, and reduce output as time accumulates. What has changed is not the system itself, but the duration over which it must operate. Energy gradually thins not because it is leaking away, but because it is being managed according to rules shaped in shorter lives. The sensation of tiredness that accompanies aging emerges from this long-term reallocation, not from a single point of failure. Understanding energy loss in this way reframes aging entirely. It becomes a process of adaptation extended beyond its original context. The body is not running out of energy by mistake. It is following a strategy that once made survival possible under uncertainty. Only when life stretches far past those conditions does the strategy become noticeable as loss. To grasp why energy fades with age, it is necessary to see the body not as a declining object, but as a system faithfully carrying out an ancient logic over an unfamiliar length of time. As energy continues to shape the behavior of the human body, a deeper pattern becomes visible, one that existed long before age was recognized as a stage of life. Energy was never designed to remain constant because constancy offered little advantage in early human environments. What mattered was responsiveness, the ability to sense limits, to slow down before exhaustion, and to withdraw effort before danger appeared was essential. A body that reduced its output early could survive scarcity longer than one that maintained intensity until collapse. This sensitivity was not a flaw, it was protection. In natural settings, restraint often mattered more than strength. Early humans lived under prolonged uncertainty. Food shortages could last weeks. Injuries could permanently change survival chances. Cold, displacement, and social instability were constant pressures. Under these conditions, the body benefited from gradually lowering its energetic ambition. Moving slightly slower, resting more frequently, and avoiding unnecessary exertion conserved life when resources became thin. Over time, this restraint became embedded as a normal biological response, not as an emergency reaction. This helps explain why the loss of energy with age unfolds quietly rather than suddenly. The body is not responding to failure. It is following a long-established logic of adjustment. Signals that encourage rest appear earlier. Recovery requires more time. Physical effort demands greater preparation. None of these shifts require damage or illness. They occur because the body is regulating itself according to principles shaped in environments where endurance meant knowing when not to spend energy. Across evolutionary time, such gradual reduction offered clear advantages. A body that softened its energetic demands as years passed could remain functional longer under difficult conditions. Excessive strength later in life provided little additional benefit when survival depended less on physical dominance and more on awareness, experience, and social coordination. Energy was therefore redirected away from force and toward maintaining stability. The body did not weaken unexpectedly. It adapted its output to match changing roles within the group. Physical evidence reflects this pattern. Skeletal remains from early human populations often show signs of long-term use shaped by moderation rather than sudden destruction. Joints indicate adaptation over time. Bones suggest sustained survival under constraint rather than rapid breakdown. These traces point to bodies that learn to temper themselves, not bodies that burned through their energy without control. Energy decline appears as a long tapering, not as collapse. When viewed from this perspective, aging becomes an extension of an ancient strategy rather than a biological mistake. The human body loses energy with age because gradual reduction was safer than maintaining intensity indefinitely. Evolution did not reward systems that resisted this tapering, because resisting it rarely improved survival when life was short and unpredictable. Instead, it favored systems that conserved, adjusted, and slowed when conditions demanded caution. Only in modern environments does this ancient logic feel uncomfortable. With reliable food, shelter, and protection from constant danger, humans expect sustained energy across many decades. When the body follows its older rules and begins to quiet, the experience is often interpreted as malfunction, yet the biological design remains unchanged. The body continues to act according to principles formed when restraint meant survival. At its core, the gradual loss of energy reflects continuity rather than failure. Energy was always meant to diminish slowly, not vanish abruptly. It was never designed to fuel constant intensity across an extended lifespan. To understand why the human body grows quieter with age, one must recognize that this quietness originates not in old age itself, but in the earliest conditions that allowed the human body to endure at all. The human body can be understood not as a single structure, but as a living system that constantly distributes energy across competing demands. Every moment of life requires choices to be made at a biological level, even when those choices are invisible to conscious awareness. Energy enters the body through food, but it never remains whole for long. It is transformed, divided, redirected, and spent. Movement, temperature regulation, immune defense, tissue repair, perception, and thought all draw from the same finite supply. The body does not store energy with the intention of preserving youth or strength indefinitely. Instead, it allocates energy according to priorities shaped by survival conditions that existed long before modern longevity. In early human environments, these priorities were clear. Immediate survival outweighed long-term maintenance. When danger appeared, energy flowed toward muscles and attention. When injury occurred, repair took precedence over growth. When food was scarce, non-essential processes slowed or paused entirely. The body learned to function within scarcity by ranking its needs. This ranking system did not disappear as humans began to live longer. It remains active, quietly determining where energy is allowed to go and where it is withheld. As years pass, the energetic balance inside the body begins to shift. Growth slows first, because growth offers diminishing returns once maturity is reached. Rapid repair follows, as the urgency to restore tissue quickly becomes less critical than the need to conserve resources. Over time, even systems responsible for strength and endurance receive smaller energetic investments. This does not happen because these systems fail, but because the body is responding to a longer timeline with the same internal logic. Energy is no longer spent aggressively when survival is relatively secure. It is managed cautiously to extend basic function. This gradual reallocation is often misinterpreted as loss. In reality, it reflects a continuous negotiation inside the body. Each system adapts to operating with narrower margins. Muscles can still function, but they recover more slowly. The immune system remains active, but it responds with less excess capacity. The nervous system continues to process information, but it prioritizes stability over speed. These changes unfold quietly because they are regulated responses, not sudden breakdowns. From an evolutionary standpoint, such regulation made sense. A body that conserved energy after its most demanding years could survive longer during periods of uncertainty. Excessive expenditure later in life increased risk without improving reproductive success. Energy saved through reduced output could be redirected toward maintaining essential functions under stress. The body learned to favor balance over intensity, especially as time accumulated. This strategy did not require conscious control. It emerged naturally from systems that rewarded efficiency when abundance could not be guaranteed. Anthropological evidence aligns with this view. In early human groups, older individuals often contributed through experience, memory, and social coordination rather than sustained physical labor. Their value did not depend on maintaining youthful energy levels. The body's internal redistribution supported this shift. Energy flowed away from physical dominance and toward maintaining presence and awareness. The system adjusted without the need for new biological mechanisms. It simply expressed the same logic across a different stage of life. When modern humans expect the body to function as a constant energy generator, conflict arises. The biological system continues to redistribute energy conservatively, while cultural expectations demand sustained output. Fatigue becomes noticeable not because energy is suddenly missing, but because the body is no longer willing to allocate it in the same way. What feels like decline is often the result of an unchanged system operating within an extended lifespan. Understanding the body as an energy distribution system clarifies why aging feels gradual and uneven. Energy does not disappear uniformly. It is redirected, limited, and carefully managed according to priorities that once ensured survival under harsh conditions. The human body loses energy with age because it continues to negotiate between competing demands. Using rules written long before life became common. This negotiation is not a sign of failure. It is evidence of a system remaining faithful to its original design. When the body is viewed as a system that distributes energy rather than stores it, the passage of time reveals a subtle but consistent pattern in how priorities are managed. Energy is never allocated evenly, because even in stable conditions, the body must constantly anticipate uncertainty. Long before modern safety existed, survival depended on preparing for scarcity that could arrive without warning. This meant that energetic generosity was never a default state. Instead, the body learned to favor caution, maintaining reserves by limiting how much energy could be spent freely at any given moment. This internal restraint did not appear suddenly with age. It was present from the beginning, quietly shaping how energy flowed through the system across a lifetime. In early human environments, this caution proved essential. Food availability shifted with seasons, migration, and climate. Illness or injury could reduce capacity for weeks or permanently. Under such conditions, a body that spent energy aggressively risked rapid failure when circumstances changed. As a result, biological systems evolved to sense time indirectly, not by counting years, but by monitoring accumulated strain. As experiences accumulated, the body responded by tightening its energetic margins. Processes that once operated with abundance began to function with efficiency instead. This shift did not signal damage. It reflected an adaptive response to prolonged exposure to uncertainty. As adulthood progressed, the energetic logic inside the body continued to adjust. High-cost processes such as rapid muscle repair, intense immune responses, and sustained physical output gradually became more selective. They still functioned, but they required stronger signals to activate fully. Energy was no longer spent automatically. It was released only when conditions justified the cost. This internal filtering reduced waste and protected essential systems. What feels like fatigue is often the sensation of this filtering becoming more noticeable. The body is not empty. It is cautious. Over long periods, this caution accumulates. The body becomes increasingly efficient at preventing unnecessary expenditure, even when modern conditions make such restraint seem unnecessary. Muscles maintain function but resist overuse. The immune system remains vigilant but avoids excessive responses. Cognitive systems favor stability and pattern recognition over speed and novelty. These shifts emerge gradually because they are not reactions to a single cause. They are the outcome of a lifetime of energetic accounting, guided by rules shaped when long-term abundance could not be assumed. From an evolutionary perspective, this pattern offered clear benefits. A body that conserved energy after its most demanding years could remain alive and functional longer during prolonged hardship. Survival did not depend on maintaining peak output indefinitely, but on avoiding catastrophic depletion. Energy saved through restraint could be redirected toward maintaining circulation, respiration, and basic awareness under stress. This allowed individuals to persist through difficult periods without requiring continuous high performance. The system rewarded moderation, not excess. Anthropological evidence suggests that this energetic moderation aligned with social structure. In early human groups, individuals who had passed their most physically demanding years often contributed through memory, judgment, and social coordination. Their value did not depend on sustained physical output. The body's internal energy management supported this transition naturally. Energetic emphasis shifted away from strength and toward endurance of presence. This redistribution required no conscious adaptation. It emerged from the same biological logic that governed survival earlier in life. In modern contexts, this ancient strategy becomes visible as a mismatch. External conditions encourage constant productivity, while internal systems continue to enforce conservation. The body responds not to comfort, but to time. As years accumulate, the internal cost-benefit analysis changes. Energy is still produced, but it is released more carefully. What appears as loss is often the experience of living inside a system that remains faithful to older priorities. The human body does not lose energy randomly with age. It allocates it according to principles formed in environments where survival depended not on abundance, but on restraint. The idea becomes easier to understand when the body is compared to a household with a fixed income rather than a machine with endless fuel. Each day, energy arrives and must be spent carefully. Some of it is used immediately for movement and thinking. Some is reserved to keep essential systems running quietly in the background. When the body is young, income feels abundant. Energy can be spent freely without obvious consequences. Recovery is fast, effort feels light, and the system tolerates waste. Over time, however, the body learns that energy is not guaranteed. Even without illness or injury, it begins to behave more carefully, not because it is broken, but because caution has always been part of its design. In early human life, this caution had clear benefits. Resources were uncertain, and danger could appear without warning. A body that learned to slow itself before exhaustion was more likely to survive sudden scarcity. This meant that the internal systems responsible for effort and recovery were never allowed to operate without limits. They were guided by signals that reduced output long before collapse. These signals did not disappear when humans began to live longer. They remain active, quietly shaping how energy is used across the years. As time passes, the body begins to apply these limits more often. Tasks that once felt effortless now require planning. Rest becomes more important, and recovery takes longer. This is not because energy production has suddenly stopped. It is because the body has become more selective about where energy is allowed to go. High effort is still possible, but it comes at a higher cost. The body asks, in effect, whether the effort is truly necessary. If the answer is uncertain, energy is held back. This selective behavior can feel frustrating, especially in a modern world that values constant activity. Yet from a biological point of view, it is sensible. Energy spent unnecessarily cannot be recovered easily. By slowing responses and reducing excess output, The body protects itself from long-term depletion. What feels like weakness is often restraint. What feels like loss is often conservation. The same logic applies inside every major system. Muscles still function, but they resist being pushed too often. The immune system still responds, but it avoids extreme reactions unless clearly required. The brain still processes information, but it favors familiar patterns over constant novelty. These changes are subtle and gradual because they are adjustments, not failures. They reflect a system that is learning, over time, how to remain stable rather than how to remain intense. In ancestral environments, this stability mattered more than strength. Older individuals were rarely expected to perform the most physically demanding tasks. Their value lay elsewhere, in memory, judgment, and social continuity. The body supported this shift naturally by redirecting energy away from constant physical output. There was no need to maintain youthful energy levels when survival depended on experience rather than speed. The energetic system adapted without redesign. It simply followed the same rules across a different phase of life. In modern conditions, this ancient adjustment becomes noticeable because expectations have changed. Food is stable, danger is reduced, and physical survival no longer demands restraint. Yet the body does not respond to comfort alone. It responds to time. As years accumulate, the internal rules governing energy remain the same. Energy is still managed cautiously, even when abundance suggests it could be spent freely. This creates the sensation that the body is holding back, even when nothing appears wrong. Understanding this helps clarify why energy loss with age feels gradual and uneven. Energy does not disappear all at once, and it does not vanish from every system equally. It is distributed more carefully, released more slowly, and protected more firmly. The human body loses energy with age because it continues to follow a logic shaped by uncertainty and survival. That logic does not fade simply because life has become easier. It remains, quietly guiding how much energy the body is willing to give at any given moment. For most of human history, the question was not how to keep energy high for decades, but how to keep it high for the next day, the next cold night, the next stretch of walking, the next season when food might thin. When people imagine early humans, they often picture bodies that were naturally strong and endlessly resilient, yet the deeper reality is quieter and more practical. Life was shaped by hazards that arrived early and often, including infections, injuries, childbirth risks, periods of hunger, and exposure to weather. Many lives ended before long decline could unfold. This does not mean that early humans were weak. It means that time itself was shorter, and when time is shorter, the body does not need to maintain energy across a long arc. It needs to spend energy in bursts that solve immediate problems, because the future is uncertain and may never arrive. In such a world, the gradual thinning of energy that modern people associate with aging would rarely become the main story of a life. The body's energetic system could remain tuned to early performance, because the environment removed many individuals before later life limitations mattered. Even when some people did reach older ages, the population as a whole was younger, and daily life was organized around the needs and capacities of that younger structure. This is why the modern experience of energy loss can feel like a mystery. We are living inside a lifespan that became common only recently, while our bodies still carry the logic formed in a world where fewer people reach that long stretch of time. Archaeological remains and studies of small-scale societies suggest a pattern that fits this view. Early adulthood demanded high output, constant movement, and quick recovery, while long-term preservation of energy was not rewarded in the same way. If an injury healed slowly, a person might simply be unable to keep up. If an infection struck, the energetic cost could be overwhelming. Under these pressures, the body benefited from designs that prioritized early function, rapid learning, and strong short-term responsiveness. Even if those designs did not guarantee stable energy decades later, energy was used as a tool for survival, not treated as a resource to be protected for a distant old age. When food was unpredictable, the body's first job was to convert what it could into immediate work, walking farther, carrying more, staying warm, staying alert. The second job was to avoid wasting energy when conditions were uncertain. Over time, these two jobs produced a body that could be intense when needed and cautious when necessary. but not a body built to sustain youthful output across a very long life. In early human settings, the energetic system did not need to answer the modern demand of remaining strong, sharp, and tireless into late decades, because the social and ecological stage rarely required it. The mismatch appears when we place the same system into a longer timeline. Once safety improves, once food becomes steadier, once medicine and shelter reduce early hazards, many more people pass into ages that were previously less common. The body then continues to operate under an older logic, gradually tightening its energetic spending over years, not because it is failing, but because it is doing what it was shaped to do under uncertainty. Understanding this historical background reframes the central question. The body loses energy with age, partly because the body was shaped under conditions where aging, as a long phase with slow decline, was not the dominant challenge for most individuals. The design was not optimized for maintaining high energy forever, because forever was not the usual horizon. The human story changed faster than the body could be redesigned, and the quiet result is that many people now live long enough to feel, clearly and repeatedly, the slow conservation strategy that once stayed mostly in the background. As human communities slowly stabilized, energy began to be experienced differently, not because bodies changed quickly, but because environments did. Small improvements in cooperation, shelter, shared food, and social protection reduced the immediate dangers that once ended many lives early. People began to survive injuries that would previously have been fatal. Children were more likely to reach adulthood. Some individuals lived long enough to move beyond the years of peak physical demand. Yet the body itself did not suddenly adopt a new energetic strategy. It continued to operate according to rules shaped when survival was brief and uncertain. The result was a quiet tension between longer life and an energetic system still calibrated for shorter horizons. Energy was still treated as something to be used carefully, even when the future became more predictable. As generations passed, this mismatch became more visible. People reached ages where the gradual tightening of energy use, once hidden by early death, could now unfold slowly and clearly. The body did not accelerate its decline. It simply continued a pattern that had always existed, now stretched across more years. Daily life in early settled communities still demanded effort, but it no longer demanded constant emergency response. Energy could be spent on building, maintaining, and planning, rather than on constant movement and alertness. Yet this did not eliminate the need for caution. Food shortages still occurred, illness still spread, seasons still shaped survival. The body remained conservative, holding back reserves rather than releasing energy freely. Over time, this conservative pattern expressed itself as slower recovery and reduced endurance, not because the body sensed failure, but because it sensed time. The longer a system must endure, the more carefully it regulates itself. This regulation does not require awareness of age. It emerges naturally from accumulated experience encoded in biological processes. As tissues are used repeatedly, as repair occurs again and again, the cost of maintaining intensity rises. The body responds not by breaking, but by adjusting. Energy is still produced, but it is offered with more restraint. What once felt effortless begins to feel deliberate. This change is gradual enough that it can be mistaken for loss, yet it is more accurately understood as moderation. Anthropological observations of long-lived individuals in traditional societies support this view. Older adults often remain active, but their activity shifts. They move with intention rather than speed. They conserve effort rather than display strength. Their value lies less in output and more in continuity. The body supports this shift by reducing unnecessary energetic expenditure. There is no single moment when this change begins. It unfolds as a quiet response to accumulated time, not to a specific biological failure. In this context, energy loss with age is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is evidence that the body has entered a different mode of operation. The same system that once prioritized rapid response now prioritizes stability. The same biology that once rewarded intensity now rewards balance. This transition makes sense when life extends beyond the conditions under which the system was shaped. The body does not know that the modern world expects sustained productivity for many decades. It only knows that continued survival requires careful management of limited resources. As a result, Energy becomes more precious with time, not because it is disappearing, but because the body is protecting what remains. The longer life lasts, the more visible this protection becomes. Modern humans feel this as fatigue, slower recovery, and reduced drive, yet these sensations are not signals of collapse. They are signals of adjustment. The body is not failing to keep up with life. It is regulating itself within a lifespan that has expanded faster than its underlying design. By understanding this shift, the listener can begin to see aging not as a sudden departure from normal function, but as the extended expression of a strategy that once remained mostly unseen. Energy fades gradually, because conservation has always been part of the human story, waiting quietly for time to grow long enough to reveal it. As life extended further and more people reached later years, the gradual changes in energy use became part of everyday experience rather than a rare outcome. What had once remained hidden behind early death and constant danger now unfolded slowly, year after year, within the same individual. The body did not suddenly enter a new phase. It continued to follow the same internal logic, only across a longer span of time. Energy was still managed carefully, still protected against waste, still shaped by caution learned in uncertain environments. The difference was that this caution now had decades in which to express itself. What modern people describe as aging is often the long visibility of this process rather than a new biological event. In earlier conditions, the body rarely needed to ask how it would feel many years ahead. Survival demanded attention to the present. As lives lengthened, the same body began to encounter situations it was never specifically designed to solve. It had to remain active, aware, and responsive far beyond the period in which high energy output offered clear evolutionary benefits. The solution was not to create new mechanisms, but to rely more heavily on conservation. Energy began to be released more selectively, effort more carefully measured, and recovery more deliberately paced. These adjustments allowed life to continue without collapse, even if they reduced the feeling of abundance that characterized youth. This helps explain why energy loss often feels uneven. Some days feel strong, others noticeably slower. The body is constantly recalculating how much it can afford to spend. This calculation is influenced by accumulated wear, past stress, and the simple passage of time. None of these factors act alone. Together, they encourage the body to avoid extremes. High energy is still possible, but it is no longer the default. It becomes a deliberate choice rather than a constant state. The body shifts from generosity to discretion. From the outside, this discretion can appear as limitation. From the inside, it functions as protection. Muscles resist repeated strain not because they are incapable, but because the cost of repair has increased. Mental effort feels heavier not because thinking has failed, but because sustained intensity requires more resources than before. These sensations are often interpreted as decline, yet they reflect a system that has learned to survive across longer time by reducing unnecessary risk. Energy is not being taken away, it is being guarded. Historical and anthropological perspectives support this interpretation. In societies without modern medical intervention, individuals who reached later life often did so by adapting their pace rather than by maintaining youthful intensity. Slower movement, careful planning, and reliance on experience reduced energetic demands while preserving participation in social life. The body supported this shift naturally. It did not fight against time, it adjusted to it. Energy loss, in this sense, was not an enemy to overcome, but a signal guiding behavior towards sustainability. The modern world complicates this relationship. Expectations of constant productivity and activity place pressure on a system that was never shaped for uninterrupted output across many decades. When the body responds with restraint, the response is often labeled as failure. Yet the biological logic remains consistent. Energy is treated as valuable precisely because it is finite. The longer life continues, the more carefully it must be used. This principle does not disappear simply because external conditions have improved. By the end of this stage, a clearer picture emerges. The human body loses energy with age not because it is poorly designed, but because it is faithfully designed for survival under uncertainty. That design favored early performance, gradual adjustment, and long-term conservation. Only when life stretches far beyond its original limits does this conservation become impossible to ignore. Aging, then, is not the sudden onset of weakness, but the prolonged expression of restraint. Energy fades slowly because it was never meant to burn at full intensity forever. It was meant to last long enough and then to quiet itself, allowing life to continue in a different, more measured form. The human body was shaped by environments where survival mattered more than endurance, and reproduction mattered more than long-term strength. From an evolutionary point of view, this creates a simple but often misunderstood principle. Energy is invested where it increases the chance of passing life forward, not where it guarantees comfort many years later. In early human history, surviving to adulthood and producing offspring were the most decisive achievements a body could accomplish. Once those goals were reached, additional energy spent on maintaining peak performance brought diminishing returns. The body did not need to remain powerful forever. It needed to function well when it counted most. This priority can be seen clearly in how energy is distributed during early life. Growth demands enormous resources. Building bones, muscles, organs, and neural connections requires constant input. During these years, the body releases energy freely. Recovery is fast, adaptation is strong, and effort feels light. This is not generosity without reason. It is an investment phase. Energy is being used to build a system capable of survival and reproduction. Once that system is established, the biological logic begins to shift. The same level of investment is no longer required, and maintaining it indefinitely would be costly. Reproduction itself carries a significant energetic price. Pregnancy, childbirth, and early caregiving place heavy demands on the body. Even outside of these direct costs, the behaviors associated with reproduction, such as seeking partners, competing, migrating, and protecting offspring, require sustained energy. Evolution favored bodies that could meet these demands effectively, even if doing so reduced their capacity later. Energy spent early was energy well spent, because it increased the likelihood that genes would continue. Energy saved for a distant future offered no comparable advantage when survival was uncertain. As a result, the human body developed a pattern of front-loaded investment. Energy output peaks during the years when growth and reproduction are most likely. After this period, the internal signals that once encouraged expansion begin to encourage conservation instead. This does not require a conscious switch. It emerges naturally from how systems respond to accumulated use. Repair still occurs, but it is no longer optimized for speed. Strength remains possible, but it is no longer maintained effortlessly. The body does not collapse after its most demanding years. It simply stops overspending. In ancestral environments, this shift was rarely a problem. Social structures often adjusted to it. Older individuals contributed in ways that required less physical energy and more experience. Knowledge of landscapes, seasons, tools, and social relationships became increasingly valuable. The body's energetic adjustment aligned with these roles. There was no need for sustained youthful energy when survival depended on memory and judgment. The system remained balanced within its context. The modern experience differs because the context has changed faster than biology. Today, many people expect their bodies to maintain high energy long after the period when evolution placed its strongest investments. When this does not happen, the experience is often framed as failure or loss. Yet from a biological perspective, the body is behaving consistently. It is reducing investment in high-cost output once its primary evolutionary tasks are complete. This reduction is not sudden because it was never meant to be abrupt. Gradual conservation protects the system from exhaustion over an extended life. Understanding this helps clarify why energy loss with age feels inevitable rather than accidental. The body is not randomly deteriorating. It is following a logic that once made survival possible under harsh conditions. Energy was designed to surge early, support reproduction and survival, and then taper as priorities shifted. Long life has made this taper more visible, but it did not create it. The strategy existed long before modern longevity revealed it. Seen this way, aging becomes less about decline and more about transition. Energy does not disappear because the body fails. It is redirected because the body no longer needs to invest as aggressively as it once did. This redirection allows life to continue even if it feels quieter and slower. The human body loses energy with age because it was shaped to give its best when it mattered most, not because it was designed to burn at full strength forever. Once the main investment phase of life has passed, the body begins to behave differently, not because it is aware of age, but because the balance between cost and benefit has changed. In early adulthood, spending energy freely brings clear returns. Strength increases survival chances. Speed improves success. Rapid recovery allows repeated effort. Later, those same returns diminish. Extra strength no longer changes outcomes as much. Faster recovery no longer offers the same advantage. Under these conditions, continuing to spend energy at the same rate would increase cost without improving survival. The body responds by becoming more selective. This selectivity is often felt as slowing down, but biologically it is a form of efficiency. Repair provides a clear example. When the body is young, repair is fast and energetically expensive. Tissue is rebuilt quickly, even if that process consumes large amounts of energy. Early in life, this cost is acceptable because rapid recovery allows continued growth, learning, and reproduction. Over time, the same approach becomes less efficient. Rebuilding tissue at maximum speed offers fewer benefits than preserving overall stability. The body therefore shifts towards slower, more economical repair. Healing still occurs, but it demands patience rather than intensity. This change does not signal breakdown, it reflects a new balance point. The same pattern appears in physical output. High-intensity effort places heavy demands on muscles, joints, and the cardiovascular system. When these systems have already carried decades of use, repeated strain becomes expensive. The body begins to resist constant exertion, not to prevent movement, but to prevent cumulative damage that would threaten basic function. Energy is still available, but it is released with caution. Effort becomes intentional rather than automatic. What once happened without thought now requires choice. Mental energy follows a similar path. Early in life, the brain invests heavily in exploration, novelty, and rapid learning. These processes are costly but valuable when building knowledge and adapting to new environments. Later, the benefits of constant novelty decline. Familiar patterns and established understanding offer more reliable returns. The brain shifts toward conserving energy by favoring efficiency over expansion. Thinking may feel slower, but it is often more selective. The system is optimizing for reliability rather than speed. In ancestral settings, this shift worked well. Older individuals rarely needed to compete physically with the young. Their roles emphasized continuity, memory, and guidance. The body's reduced energetic spending supported these roles naturally. There was no expectation of endless output. The community adjusted around changing capacities, and survival continued. The body's behavior remained appropriate within its environment. Modern life disrupts this alignment. Social and economic structures often demand consistent energy output regardless of age. When the body responds with conservation, the response is interpreted as loss. Yet the underlying process has not changed. The body is still making calculations based on long-term survival rather than short-term performance. It reduces waste, limits excess, and protects essential systems. Seen clearly, the loss of energy with age is not the body giving up. It is the body refusing to overspend. It has already completed its most expensive tasks. What remains is the careful management of a system meant to last as long as possible under uncertain conditions. Energy becomes valuable precisely because it is no longer abundant. The body treats it with respect, not neglect. This perspective reframes aging as a shift in strategy rather than a slide into failure. Energy does not disappear because the body is incapable. It is held back because the body is experienced. It has learned through a long evolutionary history that survival over time depends not on constant intensity, but on restraint. The human body loses energy with age because conserving energy became the safest way to remain alive once the most demanding chapters of life were complete. As energy use continues to change, the final aspect of this stage becomes easier to see when attention shifts from effort to outcome. The body is not trying to reduce life itself. It is trying to reduce risk. After years of accumulated use, every intense action carries a higher cost than it once did. Muscles, joints, organs, and neural systems have all been used repeatedly. Even when they remain functional, repairing them after heavy strain requires more resources than before. The body responds by lowering the frequency and intensity of high-cost actions. This response does not appear suddenly. It develops gradually, guided by signals that weigh benefit against long-term stability. In earlier phases of life, taking risks made sense. Rapid movement, physical competition, and aggressive effort increased chances of survival and reproduction. As time passes, the same risks offer fewer rewards. Falling, straining, or exhausting the body can have consequences that last far longer than the moment of effort. The body therefore becomes more cautious. Movements slow not because capability disappears, but because precision becomes more valuable than speed. Energy is still present, but it is released only when the expected return justifies the cost. This change often feels like reluctance. The body seems to hesitate where it once acted automatically. Yet this hesitation reflects experience rather than weakness. Over time, biological systems learn that avoiding unnecessary strain preserves function. The body favors actions that can be completed safely, with manageable recovery. It begins to resist repeated extremes. This resistance protects circulation, joint integrity, and internal balance. It allows life to continue without sudden collapse. The same logic shapes endurance. Sustained output places continuous demands on energy production, circulation, and repair. Earlier in life, these demands could be met easily. Later, maintaining constant intensity increases cumulative stress. The body responds by shortening periods of effort and lengthening periods of rest. This pattern is not imposed by failure. It is chosen by regulation. Rest becomes a tool rather than a sign of incapacity. Energy is conserved to ensure that essential systems remain stable over long periods. Social roles in early human groups align naturally with this adjustment. Individuals who had passed their most physically demanding years often became observers, decision-makers, and carriers of shared knowledge. Their value did not depend on constant motion. It depended on continuity and judgment. The body's quieter energy matched these roles. There was no expectation that intensity should remain unchanged. The system adapted without conflict. Modern expectations complicate this process. Productivity, speed, and constant engagement are often treated as measures of worth. When the body reduces output, the change can feel like loss. Yet biologically, the reduction serves a clear purpose. It prevents irreversible damage. It protects basic function. It increases the likelihood that life can continue, even if it must do so at a slower pace. Energy becomes guarded because it has become more expensive to replace. This guardedness does not eliminate capacity, it reshapes it. Strength may appear less available, but it often remains intact when truly needed. Endurance may feel reduced, yet it can still support meaningful activity when paced carefully. The body is not empty, it is selective. It has learned that survival over long spans depends on choosing when to act and when to refrain. By this point, the underlying pattern becomes clear. The loss of energy with age is not a sign that the body is failing its task. It is a sign that the task has changed. Early life demanded intensity. Later life demands durability. The body responds by shifting how energy is used, favoring stability over force. This shift unfolds slowly because it is guided by accumulated experience rather than sudden breakdown. Seen in this light, aging is not an error in design. It is the long expression of a rule that always existed. Energy was never meant to remain unlimited. It was meant to support survival when it mattered most, then to quiet itself as risk increased. The human body loses energy with age because it is following a strategy shaped to protect life across uncertainty, even when that uncertainty is no longer obvious. Inside the human body, energy is never spent without consequence, and every allocation represents a compromise between competing needs. At no point in life can energy support everything equally. Even when resources seem abundant, the body must decide where to invest and where to limit. These decisions are shaped by trade-offs that were established early in human evolution. Energy devoted to one function is energy unavailable to another. This simple rule governs growth, movement, repair, immune defense, and long-term maintenance. As time passes, the balance between these demands shifts, not because the rules change, but because the costs attached to each option increase. The body responds by adjusting how it distributes its limited resources. In early life, the most valuable trade-offs favor expansion. Energy flows toward building tissue, strengthening systems, and learning rapidly from the environment. This investment phase is costly, but the returns are high. A stronger body, a faster nervous system, and a robust immune response increase survival and reproductive success. Energy spent generously during this period improves future chances, even if it creates wear that will be felt later. As the years accumulate, the same trade-offs no longer produce the same benefits. Continuing to invest heavily in growth or peak output offers diminishing returns. The body begins to favor protection over expansion. Repair still occurs, but it competes more directly with other needs. Immune responses are carefully regulated to avoid unnecessary strain. Movement remains possible, but it must share energy with maintaining circulation, temperature, and internal stability. These shifts are not reactions to damage alone. They are responses to rising costs. Each act of repair becomes more expensive as tissues have already been used many times. Each immune response carries a higher risk of collateral strain. Each intense movement increases the likelihood of injury that would take longer to heal. The body senses these risks through accumulated signals and adjusts its spending accordingly. Trade-offs become tighter. Margins become thinner. This tightening does not happen all at once. It unfolds gradually as the system learns that preserving function matters more than maximizing output. Energy begins to move away from optional effort and toward essential maintenance. The goal is no longer to perform at the highest possible level, but to avoid irreversible loss. From an evolutionary perspective, this strategy makes sense. A body that continued to invest aggressively in all systems simultaneously would face higher chances of catastrophic failure later. By reducing investment in non-essential intensity, the body protects core functions. Circulation, respiration, and basic neural activity take priority over strength and speed. This prioritization keeps life going, even if it does so more quietly. In ancestral environments, such trade-offs were rarely questioned. Physical decline was expected, and social roles adjusted accordingly. The body's internal compromises aligned with external demands. Modern life, however, often resists compromise. Expectations of constant energy conflict with a system designed to ration itself. When energy feels reduced, the experience is often labeled as loss. Yet, what is occurring is redistribution. Energy has not vanished. It has been redirected away from costly displays and towards sustaining basic stability across time. Understanding these trade-offs clarifies why energy loss with age feels selective rather than total. Some abilities remain strong, while others fade. The body is not deteriorating uniformly. It is making choices. Those choices reflect priorities shaped by survival under uncertainty. Energy is spent where it preserves life, and withheld where it risks long-term damage. The human body loses energy with age because it cannot afford to invest everywhere equally forever. The cost of doing so would be collapse rather than longevity. What appears as decline is often the visible outcome of countless small decisions made inside the body to favor survival over excess. As the balance of trade-offs tightens, one consequence becomes increasingly clear. The body cannot optimize for everything at once without increasing risk elsewhere. Every system inside the body draws from the same energetic pool, and as that pool becomes more carefully guarded, competition between functions intensifies. What once coexisted with little tension now requires prioritization. Strength competes with repair. Immune vigilance competes with endurance. Cognitive alertness competes with physical recovery. These competitions are not failures of coordination. They are unavoidable outcomes of limited resources interacting with accumulated use over time. Early in life, the cost of these competitions is low. Tissues are resilient, recovery is fast, and reserves feel plentiful. The body can afford to support multiple high-demand processes simultaneously. Intense effort can be followed by rapid repair. Strong immune responses can be mounted without lasting strain. Learning and adaptation can occur alongside physical exertion. This overlap creates the impression of abundance. Yet abundance at this stage is not unlimited. It is temporary, made possible by tissues that have not yet carried long histories of stress and repair. As years pass, the same overlaps become expensive. Each demand placed on the system carries a higher marginal cost. Repair draws more energy because tissues are no longer new. Immune activation requires greater regulation because excessive responses can damage already stressed systems. Sustained physical effort increases the likelihood of injury that would disrupt multiple functions at once. The body responds by narrowing the conditions under which it will support simultaneous high demands. Trade-offs become explicit rather than hidden. This is why energy loss often feels selective. Some capacities remain strong while others diminish. The body does not reduce everything equally. It reduces what it can afford to reduce, while protecting what it must keep. Speed may decline to protect coordination. Strength may soften to protect joints and circulation. Rapid recovery may slow to protect long-term stability. These adjustments are not arbitrary. They reflect an internal ranking shaped by survival value under conditions of uncertainty. Over time, the body increasingly favors functions that maintain basic continuity. Circulation, breathing, temperature regulation, and essential neural activity take precedence. These systems are guarded because failure in any one of them threatens life directly. Energy that once supported optional performance is redirected toward maintaining these foundations. This redirection is gradual, because abrupt withdrawal would destabilize the system. The body adjusts its spending slowly, allowing function to continue even as margins narrow. Anthropological perspectives help make sense of this pattern. In early human groups, individuals who reached later life often did so by avoiding catastrophic injury and illness rather than by maintaining peak performance. Conserving energy reduced exposure to risk. Limiting exertion reduced the chance of damage that could not be repaired. The body's internal trade-offs supported this approach by discouraging unnecessary intensity. Survival favored caution over display. In modern settings, these same trade-offs can feel restrictive. Cultural expectations often reward constant output and visible energy. When the body resists these demands, the resistance is interpreted as loss. Yet biologically, the resistance serves a protective role. It prevents the system from overcommitting resources to tasks that do not improve long-term survival. Energy is withheld not because it is gone, but because spending it freely would increase the chance of irreversible harm. Understanding energy loss through the lens of trade-offs reveals why it unfolds unevenly and gradually. The body is not failing to produce energy. It is choosing where that energy can be used safely. Each reduction reflects a calculation shaped by accumulated experience and rising cost. The human body loses energy with age because it must increasingly choose between competing needs, and those choices favor survival over excess. What appears as decline is often the visible outcome of a system learning to protect itself across a longer life than it was ever designed to expect. As these trade-offs continue to accumulate, the final pattern of this stage becomes clear in how the body learns to avoid irreversible loss. Energy is no longer treated as something to be spent generously and replaced easily. It becomes something to be protected because recovery itself has become costly. Earlier in life, the body could afford mistakes. Overexertion could be corrected with rest. Injury could be repaired quickly. Immune responses could surge without long-term consequence. As time passes, these corrections require more resources and more time. The body responds by becoming cautious before damage occurs rather than reactive afterward. Energy loss with age is therefore closely tied to prevention. The system learns to limit actions that might demand expensive repair later. This preventive logic appears in many subtle ways. Movements become more measured. Effort is paced rather than continuous. Signals of fatigue arrive sooner, not because the body is weak, but because it is warning itself to stop before crossing a costly threshold. The body is not attempting to eliminate activity. It is attempting to keep activity within a range that does not threaten long-term stability. This approach reflects experience rather than decline. Over decades, the body has learned which patterns lead to harm and which allow continuation. It adjusts its energy release accordingly. This adjustment is rarely dramatic. It unfolds quietly because prevention works best when it is subtle. When prevention succeeds, nothing breaks, and the change is interpreted as reduced capacity rather than avoided damage. This preventive strategy also explains why some abilities remain intact while others are reduced. The body does not conserve energy uniformly. It conserves energy where loss would be most damaging. Functions that can tolerate reduction without immediate risk are scaled back first. High-intensity effort, rapid repetition, and prolonged strain are limited because they carry higher risk of irreversible harm. Meanwhile, functions that preserve awareness, coordination, and basic movement are protected. Energy is directed toward keeping the system whole rather than impressive. From a biological perspective, this is a rational outcome. A system that loses some capacity but avoids collapse remains alive. A system that insists on full performance at all costs risks sudden failure. In ancestral environments, sudden failure often meant death. Selection favored bodies that erred on the side of caution as time accumulated. That caution remains embedded in modern bodies, even when external dangers are reduced. As a result, energy becomes guarded long before actual damage appears. This guarding is often misunderstood. It is described as loss, yet it functions as insurance. The body is not reacting to present conditions alone. It is reacting to accumulated probability. With each passing year, the chance that an injury, illness, or strain will have lasting consequences increases. The body responds by narrowing the range of acceptable risk. Energy is released more selectively because the cost of being wrong has risen. This selective release creates the familiar experience of having energy sometimes, but not always, and rarely without preparation. Effort must be planned. Rest must be respected. The system demands cooperation rather than obedience. This demand is not imposed by failure. It is imposed by time. Over long spans, survival depends less on intensity and more on continuity. The body adapts by favoring actions that can be sustained without triggering expensive repair. In this way, energy loss with age reflects learning. The body has learned, through countless internal calculations, that preserving structure matters more than displaying power. What remains is not a weaker system, but a more careful one. It has shifted from growth and expansion toward protection and maintenance. This shift allows life to continue within narrower limits rather than ending abruptly through overreach. Seen clearly, this final trade-off reveals the deeper meaning of energy loss. It is not simply that less energy exists. It is that energy has become too valuable to waste. The human body loses energy with age because it has learned, over a long evolutionary history and a long individual life, that survival across time depends not on how much energy can be produced, but on how wisely it is spent. The story of energy loss becomes clearer when attention turns to the physical traces left behind by long lives. The human body records its history quietly in bone, joint surfaces, and patterns of wear that accumulate over time. These traces do not show a body that suddenly fails, but one that gradually adapts to repeated use. In archaeological remains, aging rarely appears as catastrophic damage. Instead, it appears as smoothing, thickening, compression, and subtle reshaping. Bones reflect years of movement under load. Joints show signs of adaptation to stress rather than abrupt destruction. This suggests a body that learns how to endure, not one that collapses unexpectedly. In early human populations, physical effort was unavoidable. Walking long distances, carrying weight, climbing uneven terrain, and performing repetitive tasks place constant demands on the body. Yet skeletal evidence indicates that many individuals continued to function for years despite these demands. The body responded not by maintaining maximum strength indefinitely, but by adjusting how force was applied. Movements became more economical. Strain was distributed more evenly. Energy expenditure was moderated to reduce the risk of irreversible injury. These adjustments left visible marks, but they also allowed survival to continue. Teeth offer a similar record. Heavy wear is common in ancient remains, reflecting diets that required intense chewing and tools that were held in the mouth. Despite this wear, individuals often lived for years with reduced dental efficiency. The body adapted by changing eating patterns, food preparation, and effort rather than by restoring teeth to youthful condition. Energy was redirected toward coping rather than rebuilding. This pattern illustrates a broader principle. When repair becomes expensive or impossible, the body shifts towards strategies that minimize further loss. Joints and connective tissues tell the same story. Signs of arthritis and reduced mobility appear gradually, not suddenly. These changes reflect cumulative stress rather than failure of design. The body responds by limiting extreme ranges of motion and discouraging repetitive high-impact actions. pain, stiffness, and reduced flexibility function as signals that guide behavior toward conservation. Energy loss in this context is not merely a lack of fuel. It is part of a feedback system that encourages safer patterns of movement over time. From this perspective, aging bodies seen in the archaeological record do not represent weakness in the modern sense. They represent endurance under constraint. Individuals lived with limitations, not despite them. The body did not attempt to restore youthful capacity at all costs. It adapted to what remained possible. Energy was managed carefully to avoid worsening damage that could threaten basic survival. This approach allowed people to remain part of their communities even as their physical capabilities changed. These physical traces help explain why energy loss feels so closely tied to movement and effort. The body remembers what has been done to it. Each action leaves a small cost. Over decades, those costs accumulate. The body responds not by denying that history, but by adjusting future spending. Energy is withheld from actions that would deepen existing wear. It is released for actions that can be completed safely. This selective behavior emerges naturally from accumulated experience stored in tissue. Modern humans often interpret these changes as decline because expectations emphasize constant capability. Archaeological evidence suggests a different interpretation. The human body was always meant to change its relationship with effort over time. Energy was never intended to support unlimited physical output across a long life. It was intended to support survival long enough for experience to matter. As the body ages, it becomes more honest about its limits. Those limits are not new. They have been forming quietly since the earliest movements of life. Seen through the lens of physical traces, energy loss with age is not a mystery. It is the visible outcome of a body that has been used, adapted, and preserved under real conditions. The body grows quieter not because it is broken, but because it has learned how to remain intact. Each reduction in energy reflects a decision to protect structure rather than risk collapse. In this way, the marks left on bones and joints tell the same story as fatigue itself. They show a system shaped by long use, choosing conservation as the most reliable path forward. The record left by tools, dwellings, and everyday objects adds another layer to this story of energy and adaptation. Archaeological sites show gradual changes in how people worked as they aged, not abrupt withdrawal from activity. Wear patterns on stone tools, farming implements, and domestic objects suggest shifts in technique rather than abandonment of tasks. Movements became more economical. Force was applied with greater precision. Tasks were adjusted to reduce strain while preserving effectiveness. These changes mirror what happens inside the body. As energetic costs rise, behavior adapts to conserve effort without ending participation. Energy loss is therefore reflected not only in bones, but in the ways people interacted with their environments. In many early societies, older individuals continued to work, but they worked differently. Heavy lifting, rapid travel, and repetitive high-impact tasks were gradually replaced by roles that required steadier hands and accumulated knowledge. Tool-making, food preparation, teaching, and planning demanded less raw energy but more experience. The body's quieter energy supported these transitions. Reduced output did not mean withdrawal from life. It meant a change in how life was sustained. Energy was redirected toward tasks that could be performed safely and repeatedly without triggering costly repair. This pattern suggests that energy loss with age is closely linked to learning. Over time, the body and behavior adjust together. Actions that lead to pain, injury, or prolonged recovery are avoided. Actions that can be repeated without severe cost are favored. This learning process is slow and cumulative. It does leaving visible traces in how people move, work, and interact with objects. The body is not simply wearing out. It is refining its use of effort. Energy is conserved not by inactivity, but by choosing lower-cost ways to achieve the same ends. Environmental context reinforces this interpretation. Early human landscapes demanded constant negotiation between effort and safety. Rough terrain, variable weather, and limited resources punished excess. A single injury could remove a person from daily life. Under such conditions, conserving energy reduced exposure to risk. The body's tendency to limit output with age aligned with these realities. Slower movement, careful planning, and reduced force decreased the chance of irreversible harm. Energy loss functioned as a protective signal, guiding behavior toward sustainability. Material culture also shows continuity rather than collapse. Homes were maintained, tools repaired, and routines preserved across generations. Older individuals often played key roles in preserving techniques and traditions. Their participation depended not on high energy, but on reliability and presence. The body's reduced energetic output supported this role by discouraging unnecessary strain. What appears as decline from a modern perspective appears as stability from an archaeological one. Life continued because effort was adjusted, not because capacity remained unchanged. These patterns help explain why energy loss feels gradual and uneven. The body does not reduce output uniformly. It reduces output where the cost of continuation is highest. Heavy labor becomes harder. Repetitive strain becomes intolerable. Fine motor tasks, planning, and coordination often remain strong. Energy is redistributed toward functions that support continuity rather than expansion. This redistribution is visible in both physical remains and cultural artifacts. It shows a consistent preference for preservation over intensity. Modern expectations can obscure this logic. When constant productivity is treated as normal, any reduction in energy is seen as failure. Archaeological evidence suggests a different norm. The human body was always meant to change how it uses energy over time. Energy was never intended to support the same level of effort across a long lifespan. It was intended to support survival long enough for experience to matter, and to guide behavior towards safer patterns as time accumulated. Seen through the lens of tools and daily life, energy loss with age becomes easier to understand. It is not simply a biological process happening inside tissues. It is a whole-body adjustment reflected in behavior, movement, and interaction with the environment. The body learns from use. It responds by conserving effort where loss would be irreversible. This learning leaves traces not only in bones, but in the shape of human life itself. Energy grows quieter because the body has learned how to endure without breaking, and that endurance has always been more valuable than constant intensity. When the physical record of aging bodies and altered behaviors is viewed together, a final pattern emerges that ties energy loss to adaptation rather than disappearance. The body does not simply respond to wear by reducing movement. It responds by changing how movement is expressed. Over time, actions become more deliberate. Gestures are smaller. Effort is paced. These shifts are not signs that the body has given up, but signs that it has learned which actions can be sustained without causing lasting harm. Energy is conserved not by stopping life, but by refining it. This refinement becomes more visible as years accumulate because the body has had more time to learn from the consequences of use. In environments where survival depended on avoiding injury, this refinement was essential. A fall, a torn joint, or prolonged exhaustion could remove a person from daily life permanently. The body responded to these risks by embedding caution into sensation itself. Discomfort, stiffness, and fatigue functioned as guidance rather than punishment. They encouraged patterns of movement that reduce stress on already used structures. Energy loss, in this context, served as information. It signaled when an action carried more cost than benefit. Over time, the body became increasingly sensitive to these signals, not because it was weaker, but because the margin for error had narrowed. This sensitivity explains why energy loss often feels closely tied to physical confidence. Tasks that once felt automatic now require attention. Balance is guarded. Force is applied carefully. The body is not lacking strength entirely, but it is unwilling to risk it casually. Each movement is weighed against the possibility of damage that would be slow to heal. Energy is released with permission rather than impulse. This permission-based system emerges naturally from long experience, not from malfunction. Archaeological patterns support this interpretation. Evidence suggests that older individuals remained active, but within limits shaped by their bodies' histories. They continued to walk, work, and participate, yet they avoided extremes. The absence of catastrophic skeletal failure in many remains suggests that these adjustments were effective. The body learned to survive by moderating itself. Energy did not vanish. It was preserved by narrowing the range of acceptable actions. This process also clarifies why energy loss rarely appears as a straight decline. Some days feel capable, others restrained. The body is constantly responding to internal feedback. Areas that have carried more strain are protected more aggressively. Areas that remain resilient continue to function well. Energy is not reduced uniformly because wear is not uniform. The body adapts locally as well as globally, protecting its most vulnerable points first. This creates the uneven experience of aging energy that many people recognize. From a broader perspective, this adaptive pattern reveals an important truth. The human body was never designed to remain unchanged under use. It was designed to respond to use by adjusting behavior. Energy loss with age is one expression of that responsiveness. It reflects a system that values continuity over performance. By limiting effort where risk is high, the body protects the possibility of ongoing life, even if that life must be lived more slowly. In modern contexts, this refinement can be misread as failure because it conflicts with expectations of constant capability. Yet the archaeological record suggests that refinement, not resistance, was the successful strategy. Bodies that learned to moderate effort endured longer than those that insisted on full output. Energy loss, therefore, marks not the end of function, but the transition to a different mode of functioning, one guided by accumulated experience rather than raw capacity. Seen this way, the quieting of energy becomes meaningful. It signals that the body has been paying attention. Each reduction in output represents knowledge gained through use, injury avoided, and structure preserved. The human body loses energy with age not because it forgets how to act, but because it remembers what action costs. That memory, written into tissue and sensation, guides the body toward survival through restraint. What remains is not emptiness, but a carefully guarded continuity, shaped by time and preserved by learning. When human populations began to grow larger and more stable, the structure of communities changed in ways that quietly reshaped how energy was used across a lifetime. For most of earlier history, survival depended on constant physical contribution from nearly everyone. As groups expanded and cooperation deepened, roles diversified. Not every person needed to expend the same kind of energy every day. This shift did not change the body itself, but it changed how the body could afford to behave. Energy no longer had to be expressed only through movement and force. It could be expressed through presence, attention, and the ability to remain alive and engaged over longer stretches of time. In these more structured communities, the value of older individuals increased in ways that were not directly tied to physical strength. Knowledge of seasons, migration routes, food storage, social relationships, and conflict resolution became increasingly important. These forms of contribution required far less physical energy than hunting or heavy labor, but they required continuity. A person had to remain alive, alert, and integrated within the group. The body's gradual reduction in physical energy aligned with this need. Instead of sustaining high output, it shifted toward maintaining stability. Energy was conserved so that life could continue long enough for experience to matter. This did not mean that older bodies became passive. It meant that effort was used differently. Walking replaced running, observation replaced constant action, guidance replaced direct force. These changes were subtle and unfolded over years. The body did not abruptly switch roles. It gradually adjusted its willingness to release energy as circumstances allowed. As physical demands decreased, the body's internal caution became less costly. Energy loss no longer threatened survival in the same way it might have earlier, because survival was increasingly supported by the group rather than by individual strength alone. This social buffering helps explain why energy loss with age could exist without preventing continued participation in life. The body could afford to be more conservative because the environment had become more supportive. Food sharing reduced the need for constant exertion. Shelter reduced exposure. Social bonds reduced risk. Under these conditions, a body that slowed gradually could still remain functional and valuable. Energy conservation became compatible with survival rather than a liability. From a biological perspective, this compatibility mattered. There was still no strong pressure to redesign the body for lifelong high-energy output. The existing system worked well enough within the new social structure. Bodies that conserved energy and avoided catastrophic injury could remain present longer. They could contribute knowledge, memory, and coordination. Energy loss did not remove them from the group. It simply altered how they participated. The body's ancient logic of restraint found a new context in which it could operate without immediate cost. Over generations, this pattern reinforced itself. Communities that supported older members benefited from accumulated experience. Bodies that avoided overexertion avoided sudden loss. The result was a population in which gradual energy decline became normal rather than fatal. Aging emerged not as a sudden drop in function, but as a slow transition in how effort was expressed. The body did not resist this transition because there was no advantage in doing so. The social environment no longer demanded constant intensity from every individual. This helps clarify why energy loss with age feels more noticeable in individual experience than in social outcome. A person may feel less energetic, yet still remain engaged, useful, and connected. The body senses its own limits, but the group absorbs the impact. Energy becomes less about output and more about availability. Being present, attentive, and alive becomes the primary contribution. The body supports this by reducing the risk of actions that could threaten continuity. In modern times, this alignment has weakened. Many people live within social structures that still expect constant physical and mental output, even as bodies follow older rules of conservation. This creates tension between expectation and biology, yet the underlying pattern remains the same. The human body loses energy with age because it was shaped within a world where survival eventually depended more on staying intact than on staying intense. Social complexity allowed this strategy to succeed, making gradual energy loss not a failure, but a viable way to remain part of the human story over time. Seen clearly, the loss of energy at this stage reflects an interaction between biology and society. The body did not change its rules. The world around it changed enough to make those rules workable across longer lives. Energy quieted because it could, not because it had to disappear. What remains is a body adapted to endure within a network of others, conserving itself so that presence, memory, and continuity can outlast force. As communities continue to evolve, the presence of multiple generations living together reshaped how energy was understood and valued. When children, adults, and older individuals shared the same space, the rhythm of life slowed to accommodate difference. Not everyone moved at the same speed or carried the same burden. This variation reduced pressure on any single body to maintain constant intensity. Energy could ebb and flow across individuals rather than being demanded equally from all. The body's gradual reduction in output became less dangerous because responsibility was distributed across age groups. What one body no longer provided through force, another provided through endurance, and another through learning and coordination. In such settings, aging no longer meant isolation. Older individuals remained embedded in daily life, even as their physical energy declined. They watched, remembered, advised, and anticipated. These roles required attention and continuity more than strength. The body's quieter energy supported these functions well. Reduced output lowered the risk of injury that could remove a person entirely from the group. Energy conservation became a way to remain available rather than a sign of withdrawal. The body did not need to resist its own slowing, because the social environment no longer punished it. This generational structure also changed how effort was perceived. High energy became associated with youth and specific tasks, while steadiness became associated with age. Neither state was considered superior in all situations. Each served a role within the whole. The body's internal logic aligned with this arrangement. As time accumulated, it gradually withdrew energy from tasks that no longer matched its position within the group. This withdrawal was not enforced from outside. It emerged naturally as the body responded to reduced necessity for constant exertion. Over long periods, this alignment between biology and social structure allowed gradual energy loss to persist without threatening survival. Bodies that conserved energy avoided catastrophic strain. Communities that valued experience benefited from their presence. There was no strong pressure to maintain youthful output indefinitely. Energy was allowed to change, because change did not mean exclusion. The body could afford to be cautious, and caution extended life. This arrangement helps explain why energy loss feels less disruptive in contexts where roles are flexible and shared. When effort is not the sole measure of worth, reduced energy does not equal failure. The body senses this indirectly through reduced demand. Internal systems that regulate effort respond by limiting output further, reinforcing conservation. Energy is released only when necessary, not because it must be displayed. In contrast, environments that lack generational integration place heavier demands on individual bodies. When people are expected to perform independently at all ages, the body's natural reduction in energy becomes more noticeable and more stressful. The biological system has not changed, but the social buffering has weakened. Energy loss feels sharper because there is less room for redistribution of effort. The body continues to conserve itself, but the environment interprets that conservation as deficiency. Looking back through human history, it becomes clear that gradual energy loss was never meant to be experienced in isolation. It unfolded within groups that adjusted around it. The body's design assumed a social context in which not everyone needed to expend maximum energy all the time. When that context is present, energy loss is integrated smoothly into life. When it is absent, the same process becomes a source of tension. Understanding this interaction clarifies why energy loss with age cannot be explained by biology alone. It is shaped by how lives are organized across generations. The body reduces energy because it is designed to do so. Whether that reduction feels manageable or painful depends largely on whether the surrounding structure allows energy to shift roles rather than disappear. In human history, shared living made this possible. The body's quieting was matched by the group's ability to carry on. Seen in this light, energy loss becomes part of a broader exchange between individuals and their communities. The body conserves itself not only for its own survival, but to remain compatible with a system in which continuity matters more than constant output. The human body loses energy with age because it was shaped to function within a collective that could absorb change. When that collective remains intact, energy fades without erasing a person's place in the world. As this social pattern deepened, one more consequence became visible in how energy loss was experienced internally. When the group could absorb changes in individual capacity, the body no longer needed to fight its own slowing. There was less pressure to override fatigue, less risk in admitting limits, and less danger in moving carefully. Under these conditions, energy conservation did not feel like retreat. It felt like adjustment. The body could follow its internal signals without immediate penalty, and those signals became clearer rather than more confusing. Fatigue, caution, and reduced drive worked together as guidance, not as obstacles. In such environments, the body's relationship with effort softened. Actions were chosen more deliberately. Rest was not treated as failure but as preparation. Energy was no longer measured by how much could be spent in a single moment, but by how long a person could remain present and useful within the group. The body adapted to this expectation by prioritizing continuity over display. It became less willing to release energy for actions that carried high risk and low return. This willingness was not enforced by culture alone. It emerged naturally from a system that sensed it could survive without constant intensity. Over time, this created a feedback loop. Reduced demand led to reduced output, and reduced output reduced the need for recovery from extreme strain. The body settled into a rhythm that favored steady participation over peak performance. This rhythm allowed people to remain part of daily life for longer periods, even as physical energy declined. The body did not attempt to preserve youth. It preserved usefulness. Energy loss became a transition into a different mode of engagement rather than a loss of belonging. This perspective helps explain why aging can feel less threatening in contexts where roles are flexible and value is not tied to constant effort. When contribution is defined broadly, the body's slowing aligns with lived experience. Energy conservation supports attention, patience, and awareness. These qualities require less physical output but more stability. The body's internal adjustments favor them naturally. Energy flows toward maintaining balance rather than toward producing visible exertion. The contrast becomes sharper when this social alignment disappears. In environments where individuals are expected to function independently and perform continuously, the same biological adjustments feel restrictive. The body still conserves energy, but now conservation clashes with expectation. Fatigue becomes something to overcome, rather than something to interpret. The body's signals are treated as problems instead of information. Energy loss feels heavier not because it is greater, but because it is unsupported. Looking across human history, it becomes clear that the body's design assumed a shared structure in which change could be distributed rather than carried alone. Energy was never meant to remain constant within a single individual across a long life. It was meant to shift roles across people and time. The body reduced output gradually, trusting that the group would adjust. When that trust was justified, energy loss did not lead to disappearance. It led to transformation. This helps clarify a deeper point about aging. The body does not experience energy loss as a countdown. It experiences it as recalibration. When social conditions allow, this recalibration produces a stable state rather than a crisis. The body finds a pace that matches both its internal limits and its external role. Energy becomes quieter, but life does not end. Participation continues in a different form. From this angle, energy loss with age is not simply a biological event. It is a negotiation between body and environment. The body brings its ancient rules of conservation. The environment determines whether those rules lead to isolation or integration. Throughout much of human history, integration was possible. Communities changed around individuals as individuals changed within communities. Energy loss became part of a shared rhythm rather than a personal failure. Seen this way, the quieting of energy reflects compatibility rather than collapse. The body slows because it can. It conserves because survival no longer depends on constant output. When the surrounding structure allows for this shift, aging unfolds without urgency. Energy fades, but meaning remains. The human body loses energy with age not to withdraw from life, but to remain aligned with a form of living that values continuity over intensity. In the presence of shared support, this loss becomes a passage rather than an ending. When time itself becomes the dominant force acting on the human body, energy begins to change in a way that is difficult to notice from day to day but unmistakable across years. Unlike hunger, injury, or illness, time does not arrive as an event. It accumulates silently. Each cell divides, repairs, and adapts within limits that were never meant to be exceeded indefinitely. The body is not built to mark time consciously, yet it responds to time through the gradual tightening of its internal margins. Energy loss emerges here not as a reaction to a specific threat, but as a response to duration itself. In early life, time works in favor of the body. Growth, learning, and adaptation benefit from repetition. Systems strengthen through use, and recovery keeps pace with demand. As time extends, repetition becomes strain. Repair must address not only new damage, but the residue of countless earlier cycles. Even when no single injury stands out, the cumulative cost of maintaining structure rises. The body responds by slowing processes that once operated freely. Energy is still produced, but it is released with increasing caution, as if the system recognizes that time has become the primary pressure it must manage. This pressure is different from scarcity or danger. It cannot be escaped through rest or abundance. Time continues regardless of conditions. The body adapts by prioritizing sustainability over performance. Processes that demand rapid turnover, intense output, or constant renewal become less favored. Instead, the body emphasizes balance, repair spread over longer intervals, and protection of essential functions. Energy loss in this context reflects a shift in strategy. The goal is no longer to perform maximally, but to remain intact as long as possible. Historical perspectives reinforce this understanding. For much of human existence, few people lived long enough for time itself to become the main challenge. External threats ended lives before internal limits were reached. As those threats diminished, time emerged as the dominant factor shaping bodily experience. The same biological systems now had to operate far longer than before. Energy loss became noticeable not because the body changed suddenly, but because time finally had enough space to reveal its influence. This helps explain why energy loss feels gradual and unavoidable. It is not driven by a single cause that can be removed. It is driven by accumulation. Each year adds small costs that must be managed. The body responds by narrowing the range of actions it will support easily. Recovery slows, endurance shortens, effort requires more preparation. These changes are not signs of malfunction. They are the body's way of adapting to prolonged exposure to time. The experience of aging energy often feels uneven because time does not affect all systems equally. Some tissues endure longer. Some processes tolerate repetition better. The body adjusts locally as well as globally, conserving energy where cumulative cost is highest. This produces a pattern in which certain abilities remain strong while others fade. Energy loss becomes selective, reflecting where time has exerted the greatest pressure. Understanding time as the main force acting on the body clarifies why no amount of comfort fully prevents energy loss. Improved nutrition, safety, and medicine reduce external strain, but they do not shorten duration. The body still faces the task of maintaining itself across many years. Energy is conserved because conservation reduces the risk of breakdown under long exposure. What feels like loss is often the price of persistence. Seen from this angle, energy loss with age is not an enemy to be defeated. It is a response to time doing what time always does. The body adapts by becoming quieter, more selective, and more protective. This quieting allows life to continue within limits, rather than ending abruptly. Energy fades because time has extended beyond the range for which constant intensity was ever required. The human body loses energy with age because it is learning how to exist under the longest condition it ever faces, duration itself. As time continues to press on the body, another effect becomes noticeable in how recovery itself changes. In earlier years, recovery feels almost automatic. Rest restores strength, sleep resets attention, and brief pauses return the body to balance. Over long periods, this rhythm shifts. Recovery still happens, but it takes longer and delivers less surplus. The body no longer rebounds to a state of excess. It returns to a state of adequacy. This change is subtle, yet it reshapes how energy is experienced across daily life. This shift does not mean that the body has forgotten how to repair itself. It means that repair now must address a deeper backlog. Each cycle of use leaves a small remainder. Muscles, connective tissue, and neural pathways all carry traces of past effort. When time is short, these traces matter little. When time extends across decades, they accumulate. Recovery must now manage both the present demand and the residue of countless earlier demands. Energy that once produced visible surplus is increasingly absorbed by maintenance. What remains feels smaller, not because production has vanished, but because maintenance has grown. Sleep provides a clear example. In youth, sleep often restores more energy than was spent the day before. The body wakes refreshed, with capacity to spare. As years pass, sleep becomes more precise. It repairs what is necessary, but it rarely produces extra. The body wakes functional rather than overflowing. This change can feel like loss, yet it reflects a system that is allocating energy carefully. Sleep is doing more invisible work. It is stabilizing rather than enhancing. Energy is being used to hold the system steady against time, not to push it beyond balance. The same pattern appears after physical effort. Earlier in life, exertion strengthens the body quickly. Muscles adapt, endurance increases, and confidence grows. Later, exertion still improves function, but the gains are smaller and slower. The body invests more energy in preventing harm than in building surplus. Recovery periods lengthen because repair must proceed cautiously. This caution protects structure over time. Energy is not absent. It is busy ensuring that effort does not shorten the future. From a biological perspective, this makes sense. Time turns repetition into risk. What once strengthened tissue can, when repeated too often, weaken it. The body responds by adjusting the balance between use and repair. Energy is directed toward minimizing long-term damage rather than maximizing short-term gain. This adjustment becomes more pronounced as time accumulates because the margin for error narrows. Recovery must be thorough rather than fast. This also explains why energy loss often feels tied to routine rather than to extraordinary events. There may be no illness, no injury, no clear cause, yet the body feels more easily drained. Ordinary tasks require pacing. Rest must be planned. These sensations arise because the body is continuously managing the cost of staying intact across long durations. Energy is being spent on protection that cannot be seen. What remains for conscious effort feels reduced. Historical context helps clarify this experience. For most of human history, few people lived long enough for recovery itself to become a central challenge. External threats limited duration. Once those threats receded, time became the dominant factor shaping bodily experience. The body's existing repair systems were not redesigned for extended use. Instead, they were stretched. Energy loss emerged as the visible sign of that stretch. Recovery continued, but it no longer produced abundance. This does not mean that the body is failing. It means that it has entered a phase where preservation outweighs improvement. The goal is no longer to become stronger or faster, but to remain stable. Energy supports this goal by flowing into repair that maintains function rather than into growth that risks exhaustion. The body becomes conservative because conservation extends life under prolonged exposure to time. Understanding this reframes fatigue and slower recovery as messages rather than defects. They indicate that the body is allocating energy to where it matters most under long-term conditions. What feels like reduced capacity is often the cost of continued existence. Energy is not disappearing. It is being absorbed by the work of enduring. Seen in this way, time does not steal energy. It demands payment. The body pays by redirecting energy from visible performance to invisible maintenance. This payment allows life to continue quietly, without collapse. Energy fades because it is being used to resist the deepest pressure the body ever faces. The simple fact of continuing, day after day, year after year. The human body loses energy with age because survival across long time requires more protection than intensity ever could. As time continues to accumulate, the body begins to treat energy not as something that can be restored fully, but as something that must be balanced carefully against uncertainty. Earlier in life, the future feels open. The body behaves as if tomorrow will always offer another chance to recover. Later, the future becomes heavier. Each decision carries more weight because there is less room to compensate for mistakes. Energy loss at this stage reflects a shift in how the body evaluates risk across time rather than across single events. This shift changes the emotional tone of effort. Actions that once felt neutral now feel costly, not because they are impossible, but because the body anticipates their aftermath. It knows that recovery will take longer and that any disruption may linger. As a result, the body becomes more cautious before releasing energy. It pauses, measures, and often chooses restraint. This restraint is not fear, it is foresight built from accumulated experience. The body has learned, through repetition, how long consequences last. At this point, energy loss often becomes intertwined with attention. Focus narrows, multitasking feels heavier. The body favors depth over breadth because managing many demands at once increases strain. Energy is directed toward maintaining coherence rather than maximizing output. This is why sustained simplicity often feels easier than scattered intensity. The body is conserving not only physical energy, but organizational stability. It reduces complexity to remain functional under time's pressure. This stage also reveals why energy loss rarely reverses completely. Rest can restore function, but it does not erase accumulated time. The body may feel better after sleep or recovery, yet it rarely returns to the same baseline as before. Each cycle restores enough to continue, not enough to reset completely. This does not indicate damage in a dramatic sense. It indicates that the system is operating closer to its limits. Energy is sufficient, but surplus is rare. The body maintains balance rather than abundance. From a long historical view, this pattern is unsurprising. The human body evolved under conditions where long duration was uncommon. Systems were built to handle acute challenges repeatedly, not to preserve peak capacity indefinitely. When life extends beyond those original expectations, energy loss becomes the visible sign of adaptation. The body has not failed to keep up with time. It has adjusted to it by narrowing its range of safe operation. This narrowing often brings clarity. The body becomes more selective about what it supports. Activities that align with rhythm and pacing feel sustainable. Those that demand constant urgency feel draining. Energy is released where it can be used without destabilizing the system. This selectivity can be mistaken for loss of desire or motivation, but it is more accurately understood as alignment. The body is choosing continuity over expansion. Importantly, this stage does not mark an ending. it marks a settling. Energy no longer surges freely, but it remains available within limits that protect life. The body learns how to live with time rather than against it. It organizes itself around durability, not intensity. This organization allows existence to continue in a quieter form, one that prioritizes staying intact over reaching extremes. When viewed this way, the experience of reduced energy becomes less threatening. It is not a sign that the body is running out, but a sign that it is managing itself under prolonged exposure to time. Energy loss reflects wisdom encoded in biology. The system has learned that endurance requires restraint. What remains is a body that knows how to last, even if it no longer burns brightly. By the end of this stage, the listener can begin to sense the deeper pattern. Energy fades not because the body is broken, but because time has become the dominant condition of life. The body responds by becoming careful, selective, and grounded. This response allows life to continue without collapse. The human body loses energy with age because it is adapting to the longest challenge it ever faces, learning how to exist steadily within the weight of passing years. As the human lifespan extended, another subtle factor began to shape how energy was experienced. The presence of overlapping generations and the shifting structure of population itself. When many people live at different ages at the same time, the meaning of energy changes. Strength and speed are no longer the only currencies that matter. Continuity, coordination, and reliability become increasingly important. In such populations, not everyone needs to operate at maximum intensity. Energy can be distributed across age groups, with different bodies carrying different kinds of load. This change does not alter biology directly, but it changes the context in which biology operates, allowing the body's natural reduction in energy to unfold without immediate penalty. In populations dominated by younger individuals, daily life tends to move quickly. Tasks are physically demanding, and survival often depends on rapid response. As populations age and stabilize, the rhythm slows. More people live long enough to contribute in ways that do not rely on constant exertion. Knowledge accumulates across generations. Decisions are guided by memory rather than urgency. Under these conditions, the body no longer needs to sustain peak output to remain relevant. Energy conservation becomes compatible with continued participation. The body senses this indirectly through reduced demand. Internal systems that regulate effort respond by limiting output further, reinforcing a slower pace. This population-level buffering helps explain why energy loss becomes more noticeable in longer-lived societies. When many individuals reach later life, the gradual decline that once affected only a few becomes a common experience. The body has not changed, but the demographic landscape has. Energy loss becomes visible because more people live long enough to feel it. What was once rare becomes normal. The body's ancient strategy of conservation is revealed not by pathology, but by numbers. At the same time, population structure influences how energy is used within individuals. In settings where younger people carry the heaviest physical burdens, older bodies are freed from constant strain. This redistribution allows energy to be preserved rather than spent. The body responds by tightening its energetic release, not because it must, but because it can. Reduced effort does not threaten survival when others are available to share the load. Energy loss becomes a stable state rather than a crisis. Anthropological observations support this pattern. In communities with strong intergenerational cooperation, older individuals often remain active without exhausting themselves. They choose tasks that match their energy levels and avoid those that carry high risk. The body's internal caution aligns with these choices. Energy is released for roles that require presence and judgment, not for roles that demand sustained physical output. This alignment reduces the need for the body to override its own signals. Fatigue becomes guidance rather than an obstacle. Population aging also changes expectations. When many people experience similar shifts in energy, those shifts lose their sense of abnormality. Slower movement, longer recovery, and selective effort become accepted features of life rather than signs of failure. The body benefits from this acceptance. Without constant pressure to perform at youthful levels, internal systems can operate according to their original logic. Energy conservation proceeds without conflict. The body does not need to defend itself against unrealistic demands. In contrast, When population structures emphasize constant productivity across all ages, energy loss feels sharper. The body still conserves itself, but the environment resists that conservation. Fatigue is interpreted as deficiency rather than adaptation. The same biological process produces very different experiences depending on whether population dynamics allow energy to shift roles rather than disappear. The body's response remains consistent. It is the surrounding structure that determines whether the response feels manageable or distressing. Looking across long spans of human history, it becomes clear that energy loss with age was never meant to occur in isolation. It unfolded within populations where younger and older bodies coexisted and complemented each other. The body's gradual reduction in output assumed that others would carry different forms of effort at different times. When this assumption holds, energy loss does not remove individuals from life. It simply changes how they participate. Seen through the lens of population and generation, energy loss becomes a shared condition rather than a personal shortcoming. The body reduces output because the larger system allows it to do so. Energy becomes less about individual capacity and more about collective balance. The human body loses energy with age not only because of internal biology, but because long-lived populations make it possible for conservation to replace intensity as a stable way of existing over time. As populations grow older on average, the way individuals relate to their own energy changes in subtle but important ways. When fewer people reach later life, energy loss is experienced privately, often without comparison. When many people reach similar ages, energy loss becomes visible as a shared pattern. This shared experience alters expectations. People begin to anticipate change rather than resist it. The body, sensitive to context, responds differently when slowing is common rather than exceptional. Energy conservation becomes normalized instead of treated as a deviation. In societies with a broad age distribution, daily life adjusts to accommodate different levels of capacity. Work is divided more finely. Tasks are paced according to ability. Responsibility is shared across stages of life. Under these conditions, the body does not need to compensate for reduced energy by pushing harder. There is less pressure to override fatigue or ignore caution. Internal signals that encourage rest and moderation are allowed to guide behavior. The body's ancient logic of conservation can operate without conflict, and energy loss feels smoother as a result. This demographic context also affects how risk is managed. In younger populations, risk-taking is often rewarded because recovery is fast and future time feels abundant. In older populations, risk becomes more costly. A fall, an illness, or prolonged exhaustion carries heavier consequences. When many people share this awareness, social norms shift. Caution becomes valued. Planning replaces urgency. The body aligns with these norms by reducing spontaneous expenditure of energy. It becomes selective not out of fear, but out of coherence with its surroundings. Population structure further influences how recovery is perceived. When many individuals experience slower recovery, extended rest becomes acceptable. The body is no longer expected to rebound instantly. Energy is allowed to rebuild gradually. This permission reduces stress on internal systems. Recovery may still be slower, but it is less disruptive because it fits within shared rhythms. Energy loss feels less like a personal failure and more like a collective adjustment to time. Anthropological and historical evidence suggests that societies with stable, multi-generational populations often developed customs that protected older bodies from unnecessary strain. Shared living, role specialization, and seasonal pacing reduced the energetic burden on individuals whose recovery had slowed. The body's natural tendency to conserve energy worked in harmony with these arrangements. Slowing did not lead to exclusion. It led to repositioning. Energy was spent where it mattered most and withheld where cost outweighed benefit. This harmony also shaped emotional experience. When energy loss is widely recognized, it carries less anxiety. The body's signals are interpreted as normal transitions rather than warnings of collapse. This interpretation matters because stress itself consumes energy. Acceptance reduces internal conflict, allowing conservation to proceed efficiently. Energy is not wasted fighting a process that cannot be reversed. The body settles into its adjusted state more smoothly. In contrast, when demographic structures emphasize youth and constant output, energy loss becomes isolating. Individuals feel misaligned with their environment. The The body still conserves itself, but the surrounding expectations resist that conservation. Fatigue feels heavier because it must be justified. Recovery feels disruptive because it is treated as delay. The same biological process produces greater distress simply because it lacks social reinforcement. Looking across time, it becomes clear that energy loss with age is shaped as much by who lives alongside us as by what happens inside our cells. The body reduces output because time has accumulated, but whether that reduction feels manageable depends on whether others are undergoing similar changes. When populations age together, energy loss becomes part of a shared rhythm. The body's quieting aligns with the world around it. Seen this way, demographic structure does not merely reveal energy loss, it cushions it. By spreading effort across generations, populations allow individual bodies to conserve themselves without losing connection or purpose. Energy becomes a collective resource rather than an individual burden. The human body loses energy with age because that loss is woven into a larger pattern of shared living, where endurance matters more than constant intensity, and where slowing is absorbed by the many rather than carried by the one. As this population-level pattern settles, a deeper consequence emerges in how individuals interpret their own limits. When many people around us slow at similar times, the body's reduction in energy no longer feels like an anomaly. It becomes a signal that aligns with the surrounding rhythm of life. Effort is no longer measured against youthful peaks, but against what allows continuity within a shared age structure. The body responds to this alignment by easing its internal resistance. Energy conservation feels less like restriction and more like coordination with time and with others. In such contexts, comparison changes. Individuals are less likely to measure themselves against extremes and more likely to measure themselves against what remains functional and meaningful. The body senses this indirectly through reduced pressure to perform. Signals of fatigue are not immediately challenged. Recovery is not rushed. Energy is released when it serves a clear purpose and withheld when it does not. This reduces internal conflict, which itself consumes energy. By aligning with a population that shares similar transitions, the body spends less effort defending its limits. This shared timing also influences decision-making. Choices about work, movement, and rest are made with longer horizons in mind. When many people recognize that energy is finite and recovery slower, urgency loses its dominance. Planning replaces haste. The body supports this shift by favoring steady output over bursts. Endurance becomes a matter of pacing rather than force. Energy loss is integrated into daily life as a parameter, not as a problem to be solved. Historical patterns suggest that this integration was common in long-lived communities. As more individuals reached later life, social norms adapted. Expectations softened. Schedules lengthened. Tasks were distributed to match capacity. The body's natural tendency to conserve energy fit smoothly within these arrangements. Reduced output did not lead to exclusion or invisibility. It led to redistribution of roles. Energy flowed where it was most effective within the collective. This redistribution also protected the body from catastrophic error. When risk-taking declined at a population level, individual bodies faced fewer situations that demanded extreme effort. Fewer extremes meant fewer irreversible injuries. Energy conservation reinforced safety, and safety reinforced longevity. The body's gradual slowing thus contributed not only to individual survival, but to the stability of the group. Energy loss became part of a feedback loop that favored persistence over intensity. In modern settings where population aging is widespread, this loop is visible again, though often in conflict with inherited expectations of productivity. When expectations adapt, energy loss becomes easier to carry. When they do not, the same biological process feels heavier. The body continues to follow its ancient rules regardless. It conserves energy when time accumulates. The difference lies in whether the surrounding structure allows that conservation to translate into continued participation rather than withdrawal. At this point, a clearer picture forms. Energy loss with age is not merely a personal biological event. It is a population phenomenon that gains meaning through shared experience. The body reduces output because it is designed to do so. Whether that reduction feels isolating or supportive depends on whether others are moving through similar stages. When many bodies slow together, the individual body can slow without fear of disappearance. Seen through this lens, aging energy becomes less about decline and more about synchronization. The body aligns its pace with the broader tempo of life around it. Energy fades not because it is failing, but because it is no longer required to burn at maximum intensity within a long-lived population. The human body loses energy with age as part of a collective adjustment to time, one that allows individuals to remain present, connected, and functional within a world that has learned to move more slowly. When the environment surrounding the human body changes faster than the body itself can adapt, energy loss becomes more visible rather than more severe. This is especially clear when modern life is placed alongside ancient biological design. The body evolved in settings where movement was necessary, rest was unavoidable, and effort followed natural rhythms shaped by daylight, weather, and seasonal change. Energy was spent because it had to be spent, and conserved because it had to be conserved. In contrast, modern environments reduce physical necessity while increasing psychological demand. The body is asked to remain alert, productive, and responsive for long stretches of time without the physical signals that once regulated effort. This mismatch exposes the body's limits more clearly. In earlier environments, physical effort and rest were closely linked. Walking long distances required recovery. Manual work was followed by periods of inactivity enforced by darkness or weather. The body's energy system evolved to function within these cycles. As energy declined with age, the environment naturally adjusted. Tasks slowed, roles shifted, and expectations changed. In modern life, many of these external regulators are removed. Artificial light extends activity. Technology reduces movement but increases constant attention. Energy is no longer guided by physical necessity alone. It is pulled by schedules, screens, and social expectations that do not diminish with age. This creates a new kind of pressure on the body. Energy is not spent in brief, intense bursts followed by rest. It is spent continuously at a low level of alertness. For younger bodies, this can feel manageable. For older bodies, whose energy systems have already shifted toward conservation, the demand becomes costly. The body responds by tightening its limits further. Fatigue appears not because energy production has collapsed, but because the system is resisting a pattern of use that does not match its design. Energy loss becomes more noticeable because the environment no longer adapts around it. The modern world also reduces visible cues that once signaled when to stop. Hunger, darkness, cold, and physical exhaustion once forced rest. Today, these signals are often overridden. Food is constant, light is artificial, comfort masks strain. The body continues to send signals of fatigue and caution, but those signals are easier to ignore. Over time, ignoring them increases cost. Recovery becomes slower. Energy feels less available. The body tightens further, not in response to age alone, but in response to prolonged mismatch between demand and design. From a biological perspective, this response is predictable. A system shaped to conserve energy under uncertainty will become more restrictive when faced with continuous demand. The body does not understand productivity targets or social schedules. It understands strain and recovery. When recovery is insufficient, it limits output. Energy loss in modern life therefore reflects not only aging, but the absence of environmental structures that once protected aging bodies from overuse. Historical comparison helps clarify this. In societies where daily life remained physically grounded, older individuals often adjusted effort naturally. They moved less, rested more, and aligned activity with daylight and season. Energy loss was present, but it did not conflict sharply with daily demands. In modern settings, the same energy loss collides with expectations of constant engagement. The body's ancient logic meets a new kind of pressure, and the result feels like accelerated fatigue. This does not mean that modern life causes energy loss. It means that modern life reveals it more sharply. The body's gradual conservation was always there. It simply had fewer opportunities to remain unnoticed. Energy now appears to fade faster because the environment no longer absorbs the change. The burden shifts back onto the individual body. Understanding this mismatch reframes the experience of aging energy. It suggests that part of what feels like decline is exposure. The body is being asked to operate in ways it was never shaped to sustain indefinitely. Energy becomes precious not because it is disappearing faster, but because it is being used in unfamiliar patterns. The body responds by protecting itself. Seen clearly, energy loss at this stage is not a failure to adapt. It is a refusal to overextend. The body remains loyal to a design shaped by movement, rest, and natural limits. When those limits are removed, the body enforces its own. Fatigue, reduced drive, and the need for pacing become internal boundaries where external ones no longer exist. Energy quiets because quietness is the body's way of surviving within a world that no longer slows on its behalf. As modern environments continue to shape daily life, another layer of the mismatch becomes visible in how effort is fragmented rather than concentrated. The body evolved to handle clear cycles of demand and release. Energy was spent intensely and then allowed to fall back into rest. In contrast, modern life often requires continuous low-level engagement. Attention is rarely fully at rest. Messages, sounds, screens, and responsibilities create a steady pull on awareness that does not feel dramatic but never truly ends. This pattern places a unique demand on energy systems that were never shaped for constant partial activation. For younger bodies, this fragmentation may go unnoticed. Energy reserves are larger, recovery is faster, and internal margins are wide. Over time, however, fragmented effort becomes costly. The body must maintain readiness without the relief of full disengagement. Muscles may not strain heavily, but the nervous system remains active. Hormonal and metabolic systems stay slightly elevated. This state consumes energy quietly. As age advances and conservation becomes the body's priority, the cost of constant partial effort becomes harder to absorb. Energy loss becomes more apparent because it is being spent without the satisfaction of completion or rest. In earlier environments, effort had a clear endpoint. Work ended when daylight faded, travel ended when shelter was reached, hunger enforced pauses, the body's signals aligned with external limits. Modern environments remove many of these boundaries. Work can continue indefinitely. Stimulation does not depend on physical movement. The body receives fewer cues that allow it to shut down fully. As a result, internal signals must compensate. Fatigue appears earlier, concentration narrows. The body reduces its willingness to engage broadly. This reduction is a protective response to an environment that no longer provides natural stopping points. This helps explain why energy loss often feels tied to mental load rather than physical exhaustion. Even without heavy labor, the body can feel depleted. Energy is being used to manage complexity, to maintain vigilance, and to process continuous input. Over long periods, this demand accelerates the body's shift toward conservation. It is not that energy production has collapsed. It is that energy is being consumed in ways that offer little recovery. The body responds by tightening its limits. The modern emphasis on efficiency can deepen this effect. Tasks are compressed. Transitions are shortened. Rest is often treated as unproductive. The body, however, still requires rhythm. Without it, recovery remains incomplete. Each day begins with residual strain from the previous one. Over years, this accumulation contributes to the sense that energy is steadily shrinking. The body is not aging faster. It is adapting to an environment that keeps it partially engaged without pause. From a biological standpoint, this adaptation is expected. A system designed to avoid depletion will restrict output when recovery is insufficient. Energy loss in this context reflects not only age, but exposure to prolonged fragmentation. The body learns that releasing energy freely leads to extended imbalance. It responds by narrowing focus, reducing ambition, and enforcing rest through fatigue. These responses are not signs of weakness. They are attempts to reintroduce boundaries where none exist. Historical comparison highlights the difference. In settings where daily life retained clear divisions between work and rest, older bodies often adjusted smoothly. Energy declined, but it did not feel constantly drained. Effort had shape, rest had depth. In modern settings, effort blurs and rest becomes shallow. The same aging body experiences its limits more sharply because it is asked to remain semi-active without relief. Understanding this sheds light on why energy loss today can feel more abrupt or frustrating than in the past. The body is conserving itself within an environment that resists conservation. Signals of fatigue become stronger because they must do more work. They replace external limits with internal ones. Energy quiets not only because of time, but because quietness is the only way the body can protect itself from endless demand. Seen clearly, this stage reveals that part of aging energy is environmental exposure. The body carries an ancient design into a setting that keeps it constantly engaged. As years pass, the cost of this exposure rises. Energy loss becomes the body's way of insisting on rhythm, depth, and recovery. It is not withdrawing from life. It is asking life to slow. When life does not, the body enforces slowing from within, conserving itself so that it can continue at all. As modern conditions continue to remove external limits, the body increasingly takes on the role of enforcing boundaries itself, and this is where the full shape of energy loss in this context becomes clear. In earlier environments, stopping points were imposed from outside. Darkness ended activity. Hunger forced pauses. Physical exhaustion made further effort impossible. These limits protected the body without requiring conscious restraint. In contrast, modern life removes many of these signals. Artificial light extends wakefulness. Climate control masks physical strain. Constant access to food and stimulation allows activity to continue without interruption. The body is left without clear cues that mark completion. Under these conditions, energy cannot be regulated externally, so regulation must move inward. The body responds by creating its own limits through fatigue, reduced motivation, and a growing need for quiet. These signals are not malfunctions. They are substitutes for boundaries that no longer exist. Over time, the body learns that demand may never end on its own. It adapts by lowering how much energy it is willing to release by default. Effort must feel justified to be granted. Rest must be deeper to be effective. Energy loss emerges here as a protective strategy rather than a failure of production. This strategy becomes more pronounced with age because recovery itself becomes slower and more costly. When recovery takes longer, the price of ignoring limits increases. The body therefore tightens its baseline output. It becomes less willing to sustain prolonged engagement, even at low intensity. Continuous partial effort, common in modern life, is especially draining. Attention remains activated without resolution. Tasks overlap without clear endings. The nervous system stays alert without relief. This state consumes energy quietly and persistently. Younger bodies can absorb this cost because their margins are wide. Older bodies already operating closer to their limits cannot. They respond by narrowing focus and reducing participation in non-essential activity. This narrowing is often interpreted as general decline, yet it is highly selective. The body is not withdrawing from life entirely. It is refusing patterns of engagement that do not allow full restoration. Fatigue becomes stronger not because energy is gone, but because fatigue must now do the work that the environment no longer does. It enforces stopping where stopping is no longer socially or structurally required. This enforcement feels uncomfortable because it conflicts with expectations of constant availability and productivity. However, from a biological perspective, it is coherent. A system shaped to survive under uncertainty will restrict output when recovery is incomplete. Energy quiets because quietness reduces cumulative strain. This does not mean the body has less capacity in every sense. It means capacity is guarded more carefully. Strength, attention, and endurance remain accessible, but they are no longer freely available on demand. They require pacing, intention, and rest that is truly restorative. The longer life extends within an environment that never pauses, the firmer this guarding becomes. The body learns that without self-imposed limits, it will be eroded by endless, unfinished demand. As age advances, this lesson is reinforced repeatedly. Recovery does not fully reset the system. Residual strain remains. The body responds by lowering baseline energy to protect what remains. What appears as overall energy loss is often a redistribution away from constant engagement toward preservation of core function. In earlier human settings, this redistribution happened quietly because the environment cooperated. Activity rose and fell naturally. Rest had depth. In modern settings, the body must act alone. It must generate resistance where none is provided. Energy loss thus reflects responsibility taken on by the body in a world that no longer slows. The body reduces output not because it cannot continue, but because continuing without boundary would shorten the future. Quietness becomes a form of endurance. The human body loses energy with age here, because it has learned to enforce rhythm internally when rhythm has disappeared externally, conserving itself so that life can persist without being worn down by constant, unresolved demand. When the body reaches this stage, energy loss begins to interact not only with biology, environment, or society, but with meaning itself. Effort is no longer spent automatically. It is evaluated, filtered, and directed toward what feels necessary rather than what feels possible. Earlier in life, energy often seeks expression. Movement, ambition, and expansion arise without much questioning. As time accumulates, this impulse changes. The body becomes more selective, and this selectivity reshapes how life is experienced. Energy is no longer used to test limits. It is used to sustain coherence. This shift is subtle, yet it transforms daily existence. At this point, the body and mind begin to align around a narrower center. Activities that feel empty become draining quickly. Activities that feel grounded can still be sustained, even with less raw energy. This is not because meaning creates energy, but because meaning reduces waste. When effort is directed toward what matters, fewer internal conflicts arise. The body does not need to fight itself. Energy that once leaked into scattered obligation is gathered and protected. What feels like reduced capacity can, in practice, feel like clearer intention. From a biological perspective, this alignment is efficient. Every action carries a cost. When actions are chosen without regard for value, energy is consumed without return. As recovery slows with age, this waste becomes visible. The body responds by discouraging effort that does not serve stability or continuity. Motivation narrows not because desire has vanished, but because the system has learned to avoid dispersion. Energy is preserved by refusing engagement that leads only to depletion. This helps explain why later life often brings a different relationship to activity. Fewer tasks feel worth doing, but those that remain can feel deeper. The body supports this by limiting baseline energy while allowing focused energy when purpose is clear. This is not a decline into passivity. It is a refinement of use. Energy becomes intentional. The body releases it where it supports coherence rather than noise. Anthropological patterns reflect this shift. In many traditional societies, older individuals did not participate in every task, but they participated in essential ones. Storytelling, decision-making, teaching, and ritual required presence more than force. These activities carried meaning for the group and demanded sustained attention rather than constant exertion. The body's reduced physical energy aligned naturally with these roles. Energy loss did not remove individuals from life. It repositioned them within it. Modern life often obscures this alignment by tying worth to output rather than relevance. When energy declines, individuals may feel disconnected because fewer structures exist to translate restraint into value. Yet the biological logic remains unchanged. The body continues to conserve energy and seeks contexts where that conservation makes sense. When meaning is absent, conservation feels like emptiness. When meaning is present, conservation feels like focus. This stage also clarifies why attempts to restore youthful energy often feel unsatisfying. Increasing stimulation, intensity, or obligation may raise output temporarily, but it often increases recovery cost more than benefit. The body resists because it recognizes imbalance. Energy loss here is not a technical problem to be fixed. It is a signal that the system is prioritizing integrity over expansion. Pushing against that signal creates friction rather than renewal. Seen clearly, this is not a tragic narrowing, it is a convergence. The body, after decades of experience, no longer spreads energy widely. It gathers it around what sustains identity and continuity. This gathering can feel quieter, but it is often more stable. Energy is not gone. It has changed its role. It supports presence rather than momentum. As the human lifespan lengthens, this convergence becomes more important. Endless expansion is no longer possible. What remains is the careful use of limited force in service of lasting coherence. The body facilitates this by reducing baseline energy while preserving the ability to engage deeply when it matters. Energy loss becomes the condition that allows meaning to emerge without exhaustion. In this light, aging energy is not simply fading fuel, it is a narrowing beam. The body reduces output so that what remains can illuminate something durable. Life becomes less about how much can be done and more about what is worth sustaining. The human body loses energy with age here because it is learning to support continuity of meaning rather than continuity of motion, conserving itself so that presence can outlast intensity. As this convergence deepens, the body's relationship with time, effort, and attention becomes increasingly unified. Energy is no longer scattered across many competing impulses. It is gathered and released in fewer directions, shaped by accumulated understanding of what sustains life without fragmenting it. Earlier in life, energy often tolerates dispersion. Multiple goals can be pursued at once. Losses are recoverable. Mistakes can be absorbed. As years pass, the cost of dispersion rises. Recovery slows, and internal tension lingers longer. The body responds by narrowing the range of engagement, not out of resignation, but out of precision. Energy is protected because protection allows continuation. This narrowing is often felt as reduced drive, yet it functions more like filtration. The body filters out what no longer supports stability. Effort that once felt neutral now feels expensive. Effort aligned with coherence remains accessible. This distinction reshapes daily experience. Life becomes quieter not because interest has vanished, but because tolerance for noise has diminished. From a biological standpoint, this is efficient. Every action creates internal signals that must be regulated. When too many signals compete, the cost of regulation itself increases. The body reduces this cost by limiting how much it engages at once. Energy loss here reflects a reduction in internal conflict. Fewer impulses are allowed to pull at the system simultaneously. What remains feels calmer, but also more deliberate. The body is not conserving energy blindly. It is conserving clarity. This explains why later life can feel less rushed even when time feels shorter. The body no longer treats urgency as a default state. It prioritizes balance over acceleration. Energy is released when engagement is meaningful enough to justify the cost of recovery. Otherwise, it is withheld. This withholding is not emptiness. It is restraint shaped by long experience. Anthropological evidence aligns with this pattern. In many cultures, older individuals are less involved in constant activity but more involved in moments that carry symbolic or structural importance. Ceremonies, decisions, and transitions require presence, attention, and continuity rather than speed or force. The body's reduced baseline energy supports this role. It limits unnecessary movement while preserving the capacity to remain attentive. Energy is redirected towards sustaining connection rather than producing output. Modern life often fails to recognize this redirection. When meaning is measured primarily through productivity, conservation feels like loss. The body's signals are interpreted as decline rather than adaptation. Yet the underlying logic remains consistent. The body reduces energy where it would be wasted and preserves it where it supports coherence. Attempts to override this process often increase strain without restoring satisfaction. Stimulation may increase activity, but it rarely restores depth. The body resists because it recognizes imbalance. At this stage, energy loss cannot be separated from identity. The body is not only managing tissues and systems, it is managing continuity of self. By reducing baseline energy, it limits exposure to fragmentation. Fewer commitments, fewer distractions, and fewer forced efforts allow the system to remain intact. Energy becomes less about doing more and more about remaining whole. This shift is often misunderstood because it does not resemble growth, yet it supports endurance of a different kind. The body learns how to exist without constant expansion. It finds a steady center. This center requires less fuel but more alignment. Energy supports maintenance of that alignment, rather than pursuit of novelty. Seen clearly, this is not withdrawal from life. It is a reorganization of engagement. The body no longer spreads energy thinly across possibilities. It concentrates it around what preserves continuity, identity, and presence. What feels like narrowing is often stabilization. The human body loses energy with age at this stage because it is reducing dispersion, gathering what remains into a form that can be sustained without exhaustion. Energy fades in breadth so that it can persist in depth, allowing life to continue not as constant motion, but as coherent presence over time. As this narrowing reaches its mature form, the final shift becomes visible in how the body relates to continuation itself. Energy is no longer organized around expansion, achievement, or accumulation. It is organized around staying intact across time. Earlier in life, the body can afford to recover from imbalance because future time feels open. As time grows heavier, imbalance becomes costly. The body responds by shaping life into forms that require less correction. Energy loss here reflects a preference for stability over intensity, not because intensity is impossible, but because its consequences last longer than before. The body learns that even small disruptions can ripple outward and persist. It therefore favors patterns that minimize disruption in the first place. This preference alters how effort feels. Actions that introduce complexity, urgency, or prolonged recovery are quietly resisted. Actions that maintain rhythm, continuity, and presence remain possible. Energy is not gone. It has been reassigned to protecting the future rather than testing it. This reassignment often feels like a soft withdrawal from constant engagement, yet it allows life to continue without fracture. From a biological perspective, this is the most conservative and therefore the safest strategy. When repair is slow and margins are thin, prevention becomes more valuable than correction. The body does not wait for harm to occur. It reduces exposure to harm by lowering baseline output. Energy loss becomes a buffer against error. This buffering can feel frustrating in a culture that prizes action, but it reflects a system that has learned how fragile continuity can become under long exposure to time. At this stage, the body also becomes less responsive to artificial stimulation. Effort that is externally imposed feels heavy. Effort that emerges naturally from alignment feels lighter. The body distinguishes between demand and necessity. It conserves energy by refusing to respond fully to demands that do not serve long-term balance. This refusal is not apathy. It is discernment expressed through physiology. The nervous system, metabolism, and hormonal responses all participate in this discernment, shaping motivation and fatigue in ways that protect coherence. Anthropological perspectives again offer context. In many long-lived societies, elders were not expected to match the pace of the young. Their value lay in continuity, memory, and presence across change. The body's reduced energy supported this role by discouraging unnecessary strain. Energy was preserved so that attention, judgment, and identity could persist. Life slowed, but meaning deepened. Modern environments often lack clear roles for this stage, making energy loss feel like emptiness rather than transition. Yet the biological process remains unchanged. The body continues to organize itself around preservation rather than performance. Attempts to reverse this by forcing output often lead to exhaustion rather than renewal. The body resists because it recognizes that survival across long time depends on restraint. This is the final form of energy loss in aging. It is not disappearance, it is consolidation. The body gathers what remains into patterns that can endure without constant repair. Energy supports fewer actions, but those actions are less likely to destabilize the system. What feels like fading is often the body choosing not to spend itself where the return no longer justifies the cost. Seen clearly, this stage reveals the deepest logic behind aging energy. The body is not surrendering, it is settling into a mode that allows life to continue with minimal damage. Energy quiet so that continuity can persist. The human body loses energy with age here because it has learned that lasting requires less force and more balance, and that the safest way forward is not to burn brightly, but to remain whole. At the end of this long arc, the question of energy no longer belongs only to biology, history, or environment. It returns to something simpler and more fundamental. What kind of life the human body was ever meant to sustain? From the beginning, the body was never designed for endless intensity. It was designed for persistence under uncertainty. Energy surged when survival demanded it, and receded when restraint offered safety. Across thousands of generations, this rhythm allowed humans to endure conditions that were harsh, unpredictable, and often short. Only recently has life extended long enough for this rhythm to become fully visible across decades rather than moments. Seen across the full span of human history, the loss of energy with age is not an error that appears at the end of life. It is a feature that was always present, quietly shaping how long bodies could last without breaking. Early in life, energy is abundant because the body must build itself, learn rapidly, and meet the demands of survival and reproduction. Later, energy recedes because the body must protect itself from cumulative damage. This shift is not sudden, and it is not accidental. It unfolds slowly because survival over time depends on gradual adjustment rather than abrupt change. What modern humans experience as fatigue, slowing, or reduced drive is therefore not simply decline. It is the body continuing to follow a logic that once ensured survival when time was short and danger was constant. The difference now is that time has grown long. The same system that once worked quietly in the background now becomes the main story. Energy conservation, once a temporary strategy, becomes a permanent condition. The body does not fail under this condition. It adapts to it. Throughout this journey, one pattern remains consistent. Energy is not removed without purpose. It is withdrawn where cost outweighs benefit, and preserved where continuity matters. The body becomes more selective because selectivity reduces risk. It becomes quieter because quietness protects structure. It narrows its focus because dispersion becomes expensive. None of these changes require damage or disease. They arise from time itself, acting on a system that was never designed to burn endlessly. In earlier human societies, this adjustment was absorbed by environment and community. Life slowed with age, roles shifted, expectations changed. Energy loss did not isolate individuals because it was matched by shared rhythms. In modern life, many of these buffers have disappeared. The body must now enforce its own limits, making energy loss feel more personal and more troubling. Yet the underlying process remains the same. The body is not withdrawing from life. It is refusing to destroy itself to meet demands that did not exist when its design was shaped. At this final stage, energy loss reveals its deepest meaning. It is not about becoming less alive, it is about becoming less wasteful. The body no longer spends itself freely because the cost of recovery has grown too high. Instead, it gathers energy around what can be sustained without fracture. Presence replaces momentum, stability replaces intensity, continuity replaces expansion. This is not the opposite of living. It is a different mode of living, one that allows life to persist without constant repair. When viewed this way, aging stops looking like a long failure and begins to resemble a long negotiation. The body negotiates with time, with environment, and with its own limits. Energy is the currency of that negotiation. Less energy does not mean less value. It means a different exchange rate. What remains is used more carefully, more deliberately, and more sparingly. The human body loses energy with age because it was never meant to outrun time. It was meant to endure it. The quieting of energy is the body choosing endurance over brilliance, balance over force, and survival over excess. This choice has carried humans through scarcity, danger, and uncertainty for most of their existence. It now carries individuals through long lives in a world that has changed faster than biology ever could. And when energy grows quieter, the body leaves behind a final unresolved question, not about how to regain what is fading, but about what kind of life is still possible when intensity is no longer the measure of living. As the final layer settles, the question is no longer why energy fades, but what remains when it does. When intensity withdraws, the body reveals a quieter form of endurance that was always present but rarely noticed. Life continues not through force, but through steadiness. The absence of surplus energy does not erase experience, awareness, or connection. It refines them. The body no longer spends itself to prove capability, it conserves itself to preserve continuity. In this way, aging energy exposes a truth that was hidden by youth. Survival was never about how brightly the body could burn, but about how long it could avoid being consumed. Across the full span of human existence, bodies that endured were not those that maintained maximum output indefinitely. They were those that learned when to withdraw, when to rest, and when to redirect effort. Energy loss with age is the visible expression of that learning. It is the body remembering what history has already taught it, that excess carries a cost, and that survival across time depends on restraint. When energy quiets, the body is not abandoning life. It is protecting it from erosion. This protection changes how life feels from the inside. The rush of effort fades, but a deeper sense of pacing emerges. The body becomes less tolerant of noise, haste, and fragmentation. It favors rhythm, simplicity, and coherence. These preferences are not psychological accidents. They are biological consequences of conservation. When energy is limited, it must be used where it causes the least damage and offers the greatest stability. What remains feels slower, but it is often more grounded. From an evolutionary standpoint, this outcome is consistent. The human body was shaped for worlds where continuation mattered more than conquest. It learned to survive by adjusting rather than resisting. Aging does not introduce a new rule. It reveals the old one more clearly. Energy was always meant to decline gradually, not because life was meant to diminish, but because life was meant to persist without tearing itself apart. Modern life often obscures this truth by equating energy with worth. When output drops, value is questioned, yet history suggests a different measure. Bodies that conserved energy avoided catastrophic failure. Individuals who adapted their pace remained present longer. Communities that absorbed slowing benefited from continuity and memory. Energy loss did not signal disappearance. It signaled transition into a form of existence that could be sustained when time grew long. At this final point, the body's behavior becomes almost transparent. It no longer pretends that limitless effort is possible. It no longer offers surplus where surplus would shorten the future. It organizes itself around staying whole. Energy supports maintenance, awareness, and presence rather than expansion. This is not a collapse of function. It is the completion of a design that always prioritized survival over spectacle. What many people experience as emptiness is often the absence of constant urgency. When urgency fades, space appears. That space can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because it is not filled with motion. Yet within that space lies a different form of life, one less driven by force and more shaped by endurance. The body makes room for this by reducing energy, allowing existence to continue without constant repair. In the end, the loss of energy with age is not something the body fights. It is something the body performs deliberately. It is an action, not a failure. By lowering output, the body reduces risk. By conserving force, it extends presence. By quieting itself, it resists being worn away by time. This behavior is not new. It has carried humans through scarcity, migration, uncertainty, and long nights where survival depended on lasting rather than shining. The story therefore closes not with decline, but with alignment. The body aligns itself with the longest condition it faces, time. Energy fades, because fading is safer than burning out. What remains is not less life, but a different balance of it. Life slows so that it can continue, and in that slowing the body leaves one final open question behind. Not about how to recover lost energy, but about how to live when endurance rather than intensity becomes the true measure of being alive. At the very end of this long reflection, nothing new needs to be added, only held quietly in view. The human body does not lose energy by accident, and it does not do so without reason. From its earliest design, it was shaped to survive uncertainty, not to sustain endless intensity. Energy rose when danger demanded action, and receded when restraint preserved life. That rhythm carried humans through landscapes where tomorrow was never guaranteed. What has changed is not the body, but the length of time it is now asked to endure. As life stretched longer, the same ancient rhythm began to unfold across decades instead of moments. Energy no longer needed to surge constantly, it needed to last. The body adapted by becoming careful, selective, and conservative. It learned to withdraw effort where recovery was costly, and to preserve force where continuity mattered. What feels like loss is often the body refusing to spend itself where the return no longer justifies the cost. Quietness becomes protection. Slowing becomes strategy. Throughout history, this adjustment was softened by environment and community. Work slowed with age, roles shifted, expectations changed. Energy loss did not mean disappearance because life allowed room for it. In the modern world, Many of these buffers have faded. The body now carries more responsibility for enforcing its own limits. Fatigue, reduced drive, and the need for pacing are not signs of failure. They are the body doing the work that the world no longer does for it. Seen clearly, aging is not the story of something breaking down, but of something holding together. The body does not aim to remain powerful forever. It aims to remain intact. Energy fades because endurance requires less force than intensity. Presence requires less fuel than constant motion. Continuity requires fewer risks than expansion. This is not a lesser form of life. It is a different balance of it. When energy grows quieter, something else becomes audible. Rhythm replaces urgency. Depth replaces speed. Attention replaces momentum. Life does not end when energy declines. It changes its shape. The body gathers what remains and uses it more carefully, not to impress the world, but to remain within it. That gathering is not emptiness. It is restraint shaped by time. The human body loses energy with age because it was never meant to outrun time. It was meant to live alongside it. Slowing is not surrender. It is alignment. The body aligns itself with the longest condition it will ever face and chooses the safest way to continue. That choice has allowed humans to persist through scarcity, danger, and uncertainty. It now allows individuals to persist through long lives in a world that still expects speed. And so the story ends not with an answer, but with a question that remains open and unresolved, one that does not ask how to regain what is fading, but asks something quieter and more enduring. When energy is no longer abundant, what kind of life is still worth sustaining, and how gently does it need to be lived to last?